everybody, Jim Cornette here for Ring of Honor, and I've been joined by one of the most controversial, unique, bombastic, and, in my opinion, brilliant personalities in the history of professional wrestling. He's had 3 separate careers as a wrestler, as a promoter, and as a booker, and he has excelled at all of them. Cowboy Bill Watts. And Bill, thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Jim, and I didn't realize I was controversial.
Well, not in your mind, but in some other people's, and hopefully we'll get into that a little bit. But when we do the Ring of Honor interviews, we always try to go chronologically, and obviously you had a long career in professional wrestling in a variety of aspects, but you were a heck of a college athlete in college at Oklahoma, and you were tailor-made for Leroy McGuirk's territory, but you weren't, as I recall, you weren't a wrestling fan from the time you were real young. How did the first contact between you and professional wrestling come about?
Well, let me go back to say I was not tailor-made for Leroy McGuirk's territory, and I never watched his wrestling. The few times that I'd flicked by it, he had junior heavyweights, and most of them were has-beens. It was so... They were such horrible athletes that I didn't respect it. Then he got the greatest athlete in wrestling ever in Oklahoma, Danny Hodge. And Danny Hodge was so superior that the only thing that amazed me was why would he be a part of such a sideshow? Because as an amateur wrestler, we looked at professional wrestling. We didn't realize how much of a work it was, but we certainly saw how far it fell short from legitimate wrestling. So Leroy McGuirk's influence had no influence on me at all getting in this business. I got in this business by accident. I was playing football and wrestling at Oklahoma University, at which neither did I ever really reach the potential that I thought I should have. That's a different issue and a different part of my life, but a dear friend of mine, Wahoo McDaniels, who was a great football star at Oklahoma University, was playing pro football and had started wrestling professionally in the off season. And he was home, and we were doing our favorite pastime then. We were out at a bar drinking and cutting up jokes and telling war stories, and he said, I got to cash a check. And it seemed like the check was about $2,500, and you got to realize this was in the early 60s. And let me take you back real quick that when you were at that age in that era and you went to college, I had never considered how I was going to make a living when I got out of college. It just I went to college and they put me in a certain class and certain courses, and you just figured you went through school and you got your degree and that'd be taken care of. And I stumbled by accident into a seminar a guy conducted about making money, and he said, you know, if you ever get to where you're making $25,000 a year in America, you're wealthy. I never even thought about it, but you got to realize this was the early 60s, and $25,000 was a lot. So while I got a check for $2,500,
that was a brand new car at that point in time.
Oh yes, yeah. My 1960 Chevrolet Impala probably cost right around $2,500. So when he pulled that out to cash it, I said, "Where did you get that?" He said, "For wrestling." I said, "For a month?" He said, "No." I said, "A week?" He said, "No." He said, "1 match." I said, "You got to be kidding. Who do I have to kill? You know I can beat you in 30 seconds, so I should be able to make a fortune." And that's what first got me interested in pro wrestling, the fact that this guy who was a dear friend of mine but couldn't wrestle, Wahoo McDaniels, made this much money in this sport. He said, "I've been telling you, you need to get into pro wrestling." So that started my quest to get in pro wrestling. And of course, I contacted McGuirk. But again, McGuirk was a junior heavyweight area. This was the 220 and below.
And they weren't doing big business at that time either. It wasn't a major territory.
They had spurts, and the amazing thing is their biggest business was done with a couple of heavyweights, Grizzly Smith and Kentucky and Luke Brown against the Assassins, Joe Hamilton and what's the other? Tom Ernesto. And they did it all off of the hard way on TV. So so Leroy had been a junior heavyweight, and Leroy being blind, Leroy was a brilliant guy. He was a former All-American from Oklahoma State University, a national champion. Had come up through some very tough times. He was there during the Depression, and he'd been the light heavyweight champion and the world's junior heavyweight champion. And then when he was blinded, he managed to be in the promotion, and he'd been very, very successful. So, but he wasn't open to taking me in at all.
Now it seems like he would be, because you're an athlete from right there in Oklahoma. You could be a homegrown hero, and you were something different. But he was resistant to change.
Well, I think there was a two-handed sword because I was great big. I was 297 pounds, and that goes to another story about how I was in a car train wreck and got on weight training by accident as a result of that, back in an era when Oklahoma University actually did not encourage, even forbid, its athletes for lifting weights. There was only
the old muscle-bound theory.
The old muscle-bound theory. There was only one guy on the campus in athletics that lifted weights, a shot putter from England named Mike Lindsay, and they didn't see that this guy was a powerhouse. And even my roommate and there was an All-American tackle that was 195 pounds, had come from a little school in Oklahoma that has more championships at that time in high school football than any other school, Ada, Oklahoma, where the Elton George, the coach, was ahead of his time and had these kids working out on weights. And they still didn't figure out why are these little guys so powerful and have such explosion. So this muscle-bound theory that they didn't understand it had permeated coaching. And let's face it, and I don't mean this derogatorily, but that's a good old boy system coaching. There's not many coaches that major in biology or chemistry or physics. There used to be an old saying, if you couldn't pass anything else and they wanted to keep you on scholarship, they'd put you in education. So, these guys make change slow. And so Leroy, again, I was big. I didn't fit his stereotype. And so he really wasn't interested. But Wahoo was wrestling in Indianapolis. And Jim Barnett owned it, but Balk Estes was running it for him, and he got me up there. Then when I got up there, he left to go back and play pro football, and they decided they didn't need me. So I'd go all the way up there. I'm dead broke, as everybody is coming out of college. I'm up in Indianapolis trying to get into pro wrestling, and they wouldn't use me. But they had a pro football team called the Indianapolis Warriors, about like the World Football League. It was sponsored by different NFL teams, and the coach, the line coach, defensive coach, was a dear friend of mine who'd been an all-pro for the Rams, and a guy named Bob Griffin. And Bob knew that I had some experience, and so he asked me to play for that team while I was trying to get into wrestling. So I had a job, I had money coming in, and I lived with Bob Griffin and then Dale Lewis. Dale Lewis was wrestling
Professor
there.
Dale Lewis.
Dale had been a two-time NCAA champion at Oklahoma University, and he was in pro wrestling, but he hadn't made any big money yet. But he was there, and so I lived with Dale, and Dale helped break me in, and that's how I got started. I got started in Indianapolis.
Well, now, how did you finally break into the Oklahoma territory? How did you change McGurk's mind?
By accident. I came home for Christmas, and Stan Abel, who was later became the head wrestling coach at Oklahoma University and was a two-time All-American at OU at 130 pounds. He wrestled in high school. He was a senior when I was a sophomore, and was and still is a dear friend. We were out doing our pastime, drinking on the holidays, and there was an altercation that came out with three guys where they started in on Stan. Now, Stan would have loved it because the little guys love to destroy big, tough guys. Yeah. But the big guy that cornered him, I thought three on him was too many, and so instead I came and wiped out all three of them. So I kind of took Stan's candy away from him, and I clobbered these guys, and in the process, the one guy I hit so hard that he almost didn't survive, literally. They thought he was going to die. I broke my hand. So I had to go to the hospital and get my hand put in a cast, so I couldn't go back to Indianapolis. They didn't really care anyway. And so Leroy McGurk decided to make me a special referee with this broken hand. And as a special referee, I got over so well in the ring and created so much havoc in the ring that there created a lot of jealousy. But there was an old pro there named the Great Bolo, who was a masked guy who was pretty well crippled up in the autumn of his career, but he was a real strategical genius. He'd worked with everybody in the area, and there was a big rivalry between the referee, who was Leroy's quote Booker, even though Booker wasn't the title then, and the Great Bolo. But Bolo saw this young kid that the people just gravitated to, that he saw the money. Yeah. So he decided to work a program with me. And that program sold out everywhere. It just did phenomenal, which created more jealousy. But that's how I got started with Leroy. Then was with this program with Bolo that made all this money, and it helped me learn the business. And of course, Hodge was great. Danny took me right under his arm and under his wing, and he was secure in his position there.
Let me ask you a question before we go any further. In your opinion, could anybody in the business ever have beaten Danny Hodge?
Well, in
a wrestling match. Yeah, I'm not talking about a fight or a barroom.
I don't think so. But you got to realize, It depends on rules and how your criteria are. There's an old saying about fights. It's who gets there first with the most. Because a guy can catch you with one, and you might be on Dream Street. But no, I didn't see anybody. There's nobody close to Danny in weight. Danny was so.
That's a pretty universal opinion among anybody in the business, is that Hodge was the best.
Anybody that faces reality. Yeah. There's a few guys that live in a delusion, but I've seen Hodge be out there with guys that had national rankings that thought they were shooting with him, and Hodge was working with them, and still guzzling them.
And
he loved it.
The dream match that everybody would have wanted to see was Danny Hodge in his prime and Kurt Angle in his prime, and obviously it never happened. But I think even then, for the people who saw Hodge and who saw both of them in their prime, and when you look at the records, even though Hodge didn't go to the Olympics,
he went twice.
So didn't win the Olympic medal.
Well, it was a lot different then. We didn't
wrestle. It was a different situation.
It was so dramatically different then. The collegiate wrestling was so different than Olympic wrestling then. They've tried to bring collegiate wrestling closer to Olympic style now, and then plus guys wrestle year round, which they didn't then. But Hodge, the way the East German bloc screwed him in the Olympics, which it was very political. Made Sports Illustrated and everything, and later on even, Don Curtis was a part of the refereeing team with another guy that actually caught the Russians and the East Germans colluding to fix a match and got them sent home in disgrace from the particular deal. So
now we know they try to call the finishes in the Olympics too.
Well, they sure would try to influence the outcome. In other words, the Olympic wrestling and Olympic scoring was so dramatically different that really we weren't exposed to it. And Hodge was never scored on his senior year in college.
Yeah, that's something. He not only was undefeated, never taken down, never had a point scored against him.
And he pinned everybody in the national tournament. He was outstanding wrestler of the national tournament, both his junior and his senior year, but he pinned everybody in the national tournament. And Dan Gable didn't even break his record.
So, but at any rate, side note, we go back to Oklahoma. Your first big break in the business in a big territory was New York, right? That would have been your first big main event spot in a Monday Night.
You couldn't have a bigger break. Yeah, that happened by, again, fate. You see, I now believe that there's no such thing as random events. I don't think you coming into my life was a random event. You probably do and wonder why, but I know it wasn't random. But Wild Red Berry was home from New York, where he was managing the Kangaroos. But he had a lot of respect from Vince McMahon, Vince Sr., and the people in the New York office, Toots Mondt. And Red was home to do the census. Red was a guy that was a World's Junior Heavyweight Champion. He was so big in wrestling, but he'd been badly injured. And he spent a year out of wrestling, and it taught him something, because he came up through the Depression. He came up through his father abandoned the family. He supported his mother. He started fighting on Fights in the Mines for 50 cents a fight, and came up the hard way. Wild Red Berry, phenomenal guy. And a great manager, because he was so eloquent. So well, it was all memorized. It wasn't extemporaneous. It was so different. Exactly. He actually read dictionaries. He literally memorized words. But he also, the key thing he did, he saved his money, because he'd been so devastated by being off for a year. So he was very wealthy from that standard and had a lot of stock, AT&T, Kansas City Power and Light, things like that. Well, he was home to do the census, because Lil, his wife, would come back to Kansas, where they lived, and she was the census taker. So he came home for that period of time, and he was on a show in Joplin, Missouri, that Bob Clay promoted, who was one of Leroy Stooges. And here's how I used to say we're instruments in the hands of fools. Here's how ignorant Bob Clay was. It's a television media, and he won't even put television in Joplin. He runs the town by announcing the town, and then he would have a live interview the day of the match on the news break, and that was the promotion. That was the promotion. So I'm there and they're going to make me Red Berry's tag team partner, in some special handicap match, tag team match. And already then I had this knack for doing things. So I said, well, let's create some excitement. And we had a little schmoz there on this interview that got so excited, and Red Berry got so excited, he thought I reminded him of Dick Hutton, who was a 3-time NCAA champion at Oklahoma State University and a world's heavyweight champion.
Luthez handpicked him to give the belt to when he was ready to give it up.
Well, he thought I reminded him of Dick Hutton, and he got so excited in this schmoz, he said, "That's right, ladies and gentlemen, me and my partner, Big Dick Watts, will be there tonight to take care of these guys." And I mean to tell you, I like to cried. And sure enough, as we came into the ring that night, and I used to jump over the top rope like all young stallions do, and as I'm vaulting over the top rope, this sweet little thing at ringside says, "Well, hello there, Big Dick." And I tripped my foot and fell flat on my face in an era when you didn't do that kind of thing. But anyway, Red Berry was so impressed with me that he went back and apparently told Vince and Toots. So I was wrestling in Bob Clay's other town, which was Wichita Falls, Texas, in a building that was so bad it didn't even have a telephone. It's called the 4-H Barn Arena. And all of a sudden the police come to get me. There's an emergency call at the police station. And I'm thinking, oh my God, something happened to my parents.
Yeah.
And when I go, it's Vince McMahon and Toots Mondt out of Washington, D.C. And they said, "While Red Berry's told us big things about you, we're starting you on TV next Thursday. Be in Washington, D.C., and you're going to be a star." And I said, "Well, I don't know if I can do that. You'll have to ask Mr. McGurk." That's and they died laughing. They said, "You plan on being here. We'll take care of Leroy McGurk." I went, and the next day, Leroy called me in and said, "You're going to Washington." I said, "It's okay." He said, "Sure, it's okay with me. It's a big chance for you." So I left and went to Washington, D.C.
And Washington was where the WWF was based at that time, and they did their television out of there, and that was where the office was. But when you went in the territory, they did something they hadn't done at that point. Bruno Sammartino was on top. Mm-hmm. They brought you in as a babyface. You eventually became partners with Bruno and got the chance to turn on him, and that's what really sparked things.
Well, their business was very solid. They brought Bruno in, and he'd exploded it. He'd got this big, great heel, Gorilla Monsoon, who was a phenomenal guy, great movement for a guy so big. Gino's thighs were like... Well, my thighs were 32 inches then, and I think Gino's thighs were 42 inches, and he could jump over the top rope in Madison Square, which is 4 strands, not a 3-strand. Yeah. It was so agile and such a good athlete. And as the Manchurian Giant, I think they had Bobby Davis, who just came in just to make Gino's promos. And Bobby Davis was a great mouthpiece at that time, and it was really, really hot. And so they had a factory built there where they were just getting opponents ready for Bruno. Well, so I came in, they were going to have me as a heel because Red was going to manage me. When I got there and they saw me, they said, "Oh man, no, you got to be a cowboy from Oklahoma." And everybody's a cowboy from Oklahoma back east, they think. And so, it's simple. I wore jeans and had cowboy boots. I just had to go to the Stetson hat factory in Philly and buy a cowboy hat, which I didn't have. And all of a sudden, Cowboy Bill Watts was born. And I had a year run before it happened as a babyface and got over extremely well, to where I guess I got gravitated to the number 2 babyface. Bobo Brazil was that special, unique babyface in his own right, but I was the guy that as the guy got built up to finally take Sammartino, I would work a little promo.
Get him ready.
Get him ready. And so, and Bruno and I became great friends and great tag team partners, and we had an instant respect. And Bruno was the most powerful guy I had ever met, ever. You got to realize that I was really strong on weightlifting, but my bench press then would probably gotten to about 400 pounds, and after working out with him for a few months, I was doing over 500, and then I did 585, which he was doing 585, and nobody in the world was doing 585 at that time. And this was non-steroid. We didn't even know what a steroid was, and we were still wrestling 5-7 nights a week. Not 7, back then Sundays they didn't wrestle, and with the injuries and stuff. But Bruno Sammartino had so much more stamina and so much more power overall than I had. It was just he weighed 285 and was phenomenal, but he had great integrity, and we just became phenomenal friends. And then a situation came up that we capitalized on that allowed me to turn heel on him that just was huge. And matter of fact, in the old Madison Square Garden, it's my understanding that was the largest crowd in that venue for any event in its history. Now, does that mean that other events in Madison Madison Square didn't sell out? No. It meant the fire marshal didn't show up that night, and Vince Sr. then stacked the place.
And the ring was smaller than a basketball court, so you could get
they had that anyway. They were selling out Madison Square Garden. That night, literally, the fire marshal didn't show up, which allowed them to really run into the standing room. So, it sold out by noon that day or the day before or something like that. But this was the biggest event ever in its history when I wrestled San Martino there. And we had a great run. And I had about a year there as a heel. And then I left there and, of course, was always going to go back and never did. But Vince Sr. and I maintained tremendous relationship for the rest of my career. And especially after I became a promoter. He had a lot of class. He had a way of working with you that was so diplomatic because he was in the driver's seat.
Well, you told me the one time to tell a story of using King Kong Bundy as an example. If Vince Sr. would call you up and say, I need King Kong Bundy, can I have him? Well, you knew he was going.
And yeah, you couldn't, my territory couldn't compete with the money of Madison Square Garden and the Eastern Seaboard or the press area that gave him so much power commercially. And so, yeah, but he would say, Bill, I'm going to start Waldo Von Erich, for instance. I'm going to, because Bundy came a lot later. Waldo was a big star and had been a star for Vince. He said, I'm going to start Waldo in 3 months. I need him for this TV, and this TV. Is that okay with you? And well, sure, Vince. I appreciate your for calling. He said, well, look, he said, you're always so cooperative. It's like saying, does General Motors going to tell you, you get... Yeah. He said, and since you are, he said, I want to give you an extra week on the Giant because Vince booked the Giant. And so if you had your mind on your head on that day, and you had everything right and ready for Andre when he came, that was a week of sellouts.
So you made more money in a week with Andre than you'd make if Waldo Von Erich had stayed there for 6 months.
Well, maybe or maybe not, but you certainly at least got that week of sellouts as the bonus for being cooperative to something you couldn't have stopped in.
Yeah, that you had no control over.
It's the difference in rape and intercourse. If Vince kissed you, Vince is giving you a kiss and blowing in your ear, and so then it's okay. Well, they could have just raped you.
So, while you were, and I guess that was what, 1965, 66, that you were on top in New York in the WWF. You had not only the sellout with Bruno in the Garden, but you had some matches with guys like Johnny Valentine and Bobo Brazil in Washington. Bobo in Washington was probably, because of the African American population, even more over than Bruno. That was like Bobo's town. And
well, yes, Washington had a predominantly black demographic. And you got to realize this
could that have planted a seed for the Junkyard Dog later on in your mind 20 years later?
I don't know that I was that smart then.
That's honest.
I think I was just trying to survive. But here's what you realized is that, and you got to go back and touch on something. America has had a lot of soul searching. We're the only nation that fought a war over slavery, and still we didn't really have equal rights, and we had a lot of prejudice, and all this was coming to a head, and there was a civil rights movement beginning, and I was so ignorant. I'd grown up in white schools, and fortunately sports became a common way of meeting other. My first contact was with Prentice Gaunt. Bud Wilkinson was the first huge coach in the majors and Prentice Gaunt was the first black athlete that was offered a full scholarship at Oklahoma University to play football. And then Wallace Johnson, who's a dear friend of mine. So by getting to know some of these black men as men and people, you see, I think what we're really afraid of is the unknown, what we don't know, what's not usual to us. And so we have a fear. And so that's what that started. And when they meet Bobo, Bobo was a first-class guy. He was a great big guy, but he was just first class. He knew what he was, he knew his role, and he handled it with such class. So,
he was a groundbreaker because at the time that he became a main eventer, sometimes he couldn't stay at the hotel that the rest of the wrestlers were standing across the street from the building, or sometimes he wouldn't even have been allowed to sit in ringside in some of the buildings that he was main eventing in.
Yeah, back when
he had to put up with that.
When I was at Oklahoma University, there's hotels that wouldn't let Prentice Gaunt stay with the team. We walked out of a restaurant once that wouldn't serve him, the whole team. So yeah, prejudice was unbelievable. You go down, and we can go into Louisiana later. The prejudice in the states that were even further south. And you know, you can say I understand it. No, if you're not black, you don't understand it. You can't walk in a black man's shoes if you're a white man. You can try to have empathy, and you can have it to it, but you can never understand how that's. So anyway, here's Bobo Brazil in a position of class in Washington D.C. And this is the summer they burnt Washington D.C. The blacks burned it in a deal of unrest. So there was tremendous civil unrest and tremendous things happening, and there was a real polarization going on. And here's this young idiot from Oklahoma who would do anything to make money, and getting on television and saying things that you could not even say today, which my interviews about Bobo Brazil, I set up this whole scenario in that I used to brag about my big ranch in Oklahoma. I didn't have a ranch in Oklahoma. Good gosh, I could barely afford to get out of town. Not then. I later had a lot of property and a lot of different things, and even had some cattle. Leroy McGurk had a big ranch, and I'd taken pictures on Leroy's ranch, which he had helped me do, and understanding. But I'm talking about my ranch, and that I used to have all my friends together. And Bobo was known for the headbutt, the cocoa butt, and that was his finishing move. And so I would talk about the fact that we used to entertain them, but we'd take a goat, a ram with the big horns, and we'd hit it with a cattle prod, which is a device with 7 batteries in it that
Electric shock,
electric.
yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's brutal. And we'd hit them with that, and the ram would charge us, and we'd jump over it, and we'd laugh. And then when we were really tired of playing with it, we'd get by a cliff and jump over it and go out and hit on the rocks, and it'd kill itself. Then we'd barbecue it. And I said, that's what I'm going to do to Bobo. I'm going to gouge him and gouge him and gouge him. And then after I barbecue him, all he's going to be good for is shining my boots and carrying my bag, and that's his station in life. I said that on television in Washington, D.C. Not even, just trying to create heat, not realizing, and they never ask you what you're going to say, and they let the thing play.
Yeah.
How stupid that is. Because I was insulting every black person's race and origin. And there's no excuse for that for show business or for anything else.
But it was a different time at that time.
It was a worse time.
It was a worse time, but it was a different time in terms of television standards and what they would allow. So when that got on and the people heard it, you were akin to Adolf Hitler and Genghis Khan on the list of most popular.
I'll never forget, the Saturday Evening Post was doing a big spread on me, and that was huge. Vince was so proud of that because that was a major magazine, and they were doing the deal called The Rich Full Life of a Bad Guy, and a guy named Myron Cope, who lives in Pittsburgh, was the writer, and he was traveling with me. So here we come to the arena for this event with Bobo, and he wants to go to ringside with me for the event, and that's fine with me. We get there, and it's out of control. And inside the arena, they've literally built a wire fence down over the entryway, over the top of it, so that they couldn't throw stuff at me as I came out. Well, they'd gone around that real quick. They had all urinated in buckets. As we came out with 40 guards to get me to the ring, they're throwing buckets of human urine on me. And this place is out of control. Getting to the ring. See, what the guys don't understand today, we used to have to sometimes fight just to get to the ring. And then we might have a riot and never have the match finish, and then we might have to fight all the way back to the dressing room. Because the people were so involved in our matches, and they believed it was real. So here's Bobo and I in this ring, and Myron Cope signals to me, he said, Bill, have these guards take me back to the dressing room. You're never going to make it out of here alive. We'd had 40 guards just to get me to the ring that had to fight every step of the way to get me to the ring. Now, I'm not scared yet. That's how dumb I was. So Bobo and I had this match where I ended up getting my hand raised. Not that I pinned him or anything. I think he got disqualified, but I got my hand raised. And I am telling you, over the top ropes, they're coming in from all directions, opening knives as they come. I'll kill that honky, whatever. I look, and the whole way to the dressing room, the 40 guards are overrun. They're swamped. Phil Zacco had seen it was out of control, and he's got somehow my attention. He's the other direction.
The promoter.
The other direction. In other words, go the direct. They know I got to come out this way. They're massing there to kill me. I go the other way. I ended up jumping the hockey retaining wall. I don't know how many people I hit. Something like 16 or 17 people went to the hospital. I kick open a door and run a mile and hide in a filling station and call back for my clothes. That's how wild that was. I mean, it was brutal.
But
And guess what they did?
brought it back.
Brought it back. They said, we didn't kill him this time, we're going to make sure we get him. And that was just one instance. We had another tremendous racial instance in South Norwalk, Connecticut. And the payoff there for the wrestler was $25 and almost got my car turned over. So, I mean, it was really a different time. And
But now, having told that story, and let me jump ahead and get your thought on this, because how frustrating is it? I'm not going to mention the moron's name because I hate him too. But how frustrating is it for you to have been probably the first promoter to use, Bobo was a special attraction, but he wasn't the top guy. The first promoter to use a black man as the top athlete in the territory, the star, to have probably hired more black wrestlers than anybody in your era as a promoter, to have booked them properly and put them over. And all of a sudden, for the general public out there, Bill Watts and the word racist seems to go hand in hand because of comments that you made that were misconstrued because of somebody's agenda at the time in WCW. It's got to be frustrating.
well, I don't see that everybody out there sees me as a racist. Anybody that knows me knows I'm not. They know that I
For the people who don't, it's sometimes more dangerous.
You know, if I went around worrying about what people that don't know me think, good gosh, I don't think you can please everybody. I don't even try. You know, sometimes I just want to whack you again. But you got to understand, I hate racism. I think it's the height of ignorance. It's the height of darkness. Any racism, whether it's against blacks or whether it's against Jews or whether it's against anything for racial purposes, I hate it. And I don't think that the racial aspect started motivating me toward building black stars. I think the fact that as I studied the business and the demographics more, and I looked at our business, which is a manipulated business, and we had no black superstars, I'm saying, how dumb is this as a business? Every other true sport has black superstars. Matter of fact, most of them are dominated by blacks. And yet we don't. That should be an insult to everybody's intelligence. So I started looking for blacks that I could build, and I could build a relationship with and a trustworthiness with, because the key thing about it, if you invested yourself in building somebody, you had to trust them. You had to trust that they had a good word and good ethics and some principle where they would, you could agree on certain things and know that they would carry their end of the bargain if you did.
And know they're going to be there. If you put them in the spot, they're not going to hold you up.
I tried one of the greatest who I'd known for some time, Thunderbolt Patterson. And Thunderbolt was awesome, but I think Thunderbolt had already been through so much of the problems that sometimes he couldn't overcome the problems of what he'd been preconditioned with. But he tried hard.
And also, I don't think he had a clear picture. He was not NWA Championship material as a worker in the ring.
No,
he was
but
a great draw.
I wouldn't even go in that direction.
Well, but he had a problem in Georgia because they never put the belt on him. But
no, that wasn't his problem. We would have done anything for him. That's not true at all. That had nothing to do with the belt. Had nothing to do with it. It just had to do with where he was and where it was, and that sometimes he was wanting to go the direction that he wanted to go, kind of like a Terrell Owens today in the NFL. He wants to do things that are detrimental to the direction you're wanting to go in spite of it, you know. And it wasn't all his fault at all. I still love the guy. He had a great heart. He was a great athlete, a great performer, and I learned a lot. See, everything is you either grow and learn from things or you don't. So I'd gone through that, and then there was another guy that Ernie Ladd, who I'd met as a rookie in football and didn't like him, thought he was a smartass. And then I saw Ernie Ladd in a dressing room situation in Baltimore. The week that Lyndon Johnson signed the Equal Rights Amendment, my tag team partner stood up in the dressing room and called him the N-word. And I thought, my gosh, Ernie's going to knock him cold, and Ernie didn't do it. And I thought then Ernie was not too tough. What it was, Ernie was very, very smart. He realized if he'd have knocked my tag partner out, which he could have easily done, Ernie was 6'9", 320, and a great athlete, that he'd have got fired. And he was making a ton of money. So he just kept looking down and playing his cards. And Bobo fouled it away. Bobo looked down and played his cards, and Bobo didn't say a word either. My tag partner was totally out of line. But Ernie, I then decided I needed to.
And I know the name of the person that you're not mentioning, and I won't mention it either. But Ernie Ladd and Bobo Brazil ended up bigger stars and with more longevity than the guy that you're talking about in the business.
Yeah, this guy passed on into the darkness, and Ernie, I ended up then finally getting to know, and he had tremendous integrity. He was a true student of our business, and then he decided to come to work for me, and I made him my booker. So I made him the most important cog in my business, my booker. And Ernie Ladd is my brother. I love Ernie Ladd. We are so close, it's unreal. We've been through the fire together. We've screamed at each other.
You fired him?
Many times. And he's loved me through every bit of it. Loved me through every bit. He's a much bigger man than I am, not only in size but in heart. And his wife Roz, Ernie was great. Ernie taught me as much as I could learn about being black from being white. And then the Junkyard Dog we luckily found. Actually, I think it was Grizz's son, Jake. The only good thing I think he's ever done in his life was make a recommendation about Sylvester River. They were in the Sylvester River, and I changed his name to the Junkyard Dog, and the music and everything else. And then when Ernie and I had a big war over an incident that happened right after that, and I fired Ernie again. But Junkyard Dog surpassed everything. It wasn't about black and white. It was about green. It's called money.
Yeah.
And Junkyard Dog, and we didn't make our interviews racist.
Well, you sat there, you analyzed your territory, your audience in Mississippi, Louisiana, parts of Texas. You had a tremendous black population. That
you can analyze the United States. Just don't hold it down to Mississippi and Louisiana.
But in what you had control over, you needed someone to identify with that part of the population. Just like now, the Hispanic population has boomed in this country, and there are no Hispanic stars except for Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, who have been used speciously at best.
Before I sold out of this business, I was already trying to cultivate the Spanish with Chavo
and Hector,
and with the star of the Houston area, several guys. But bottom line is, so then when I went to WCW to try to straighten out the mess Ted Turner's group had made of what I'd sold them, but it was beyond saving with that group of politicians that they call themselves Turner Broadcasting. I made the first black star a true world's champion in Ron Reed.
Ron
Simmons. Also made my office manager a black lady, not because she's black, because she was the best person for the job. Brenda was awesome. And then for somebody who was an idiot that hides behind the fact that he's a newspaper man. See, back years ago when somebody writes something like that, you just walked in and you just slapped the snot out of him, and it had been done. But you can't do that now because they hide behind me.
No, you can't do that
now. He claims that I'm a racist. And the deal was that one time somebody asked me what I thought of Lester Maddox. And I said, I don't agree with racism, but he's a man of conviction. He believed in his conviction so much that rather than being told who he had to serve, he closed his restaurant. That's conviction. Now, I believe that you can't legislate conviction, but that the free market should decide it. It's just too bad that in America we're having to legislate.
So your point was, and this was what was misconstrued, your point was about business in general, whether it be black people, white people, green people, or polka-dotted people. If you don't want to serve or sell your products to a specific person, that's taking money out of your pocket, but you ought to have the right to go out of business on your own.
If you're putting up the money, you should be able to control your business. It shouldn't be legislated. Now,
the government can't legislate morality
well, no, we have a right to legislate morality. You don't know. We have a right.
The word I'm going for. The government shouldn't have the right to legislate people's personal
murder is a morality problem.
True.
And if we don't legislate murder and robbing and killing, okay. And what I said about Lester Maddox is, at least what he believed strong enough that you didn't have to second guess him. He wasn't telling you one thing out of the front of his mouth and doing another thing out of the back of his mouth. So all I said is he was a man of conviction. I believe the Buddhist monks that burned themselves in protest of the Vietnam War had conviction. Do I believe they were stupid to burn themselves? Yes. Does that make me a racist? No.
And clear one other thing up, because that's the same person spread the story that by sending in this comment that you had made a year and a half before, that Turner Broadcasting and the officials, and no, you had told me, because we were talking on the phone, because that's at the point in time when I was working with you out of Knoxville, you told me that you were headed home.
That's right.
Before that took place, because you could not have the control that you were promised over the wrestling product.
Yeah. And wait a minute. That interview situation had come up in my pre-hire interview.
Yeah, it was
by the very same people, and they'd already said, well, we understand that. That is no problem. Then the little guy who there was a guy that I had to report to who was in Ted Turner's elite staff, and I'm sure that every time Ted stopped to scratch his ass, he scratched this guy's nose. It was so far up his ass. When he called me over that day to do what he thought was his big coup, I'd already told Bob Dew, who was my boss, I can't stand it anymore. I quit and I'm going home. So
because you told me on the phone a week or two before that happened, well, I'm not going to be here very much longer. I'm fixed to head to the house.
I was negotiating to bring Ric Flair over. We had Ric Flair coming over, and I called Rick, and I said, Rick, I won't be here when you get here, but they want you, so make whatever deal you want to make.
And he put our deal in writing for that pay-per-view that we'd already shot, because you knew they were going to try to screw us.
I was, because you see, when I got there, they were losing $8 million a year. And they said, can you bring it in at under $8 million a year loss? I said, well, I hope so. Good gosh, I think you've got to be an idiot to lose $8 million a year in wrestling. And we brought it in 11 months at a $400,000 loss. So we had reduced it from an $8 million loss to $400,000 in 11 months. The ratings were up, the arenas were up, everything was moving up, and they couldn't stand it. They couldn't even give me a letter of commendation, and I couldn't even fire him. I'd fire this guy, and they'd rehire him. And I mean, it was just a big cluster jerk in there, and you see, I've never been concerned about facing the arrows to do my job that you face head on. But those ones shot in your back are painful. when you got the guys that are you're helping and you're keeping them a job and you're providing them a job and you're taking it, and they're the ones shooting you in the back. That's a little, if you got to spend all day guarding your back. Yeah.
And that was the problem. That was the problem not only with WCW. That's the problem with any corporate entity in this world today, and that's the problem with committees.
Yeah.
There has to be the horse has to have a head and ass, and the horse's head has to be able to send out at least somewhat of a control signal to the rest of the body, because if the arms and legs and tail are trying to do its own thing, then the horse it don't work.
We see the epitome of that today in politics. Everything is so polarized, and the way, if you disagree with their take on it, the first thing you have to do is demonize you or criminalize you. And if you look at the Valerie Plume deal, the outing of a CIA agent, and the crap blown up over this, it looks like that movie, about the tail wagging the dog that Dustin Hoffman did. I mean, this is so preposterous. She was never in any danger. She certainly wasn't covert. And her husband goes down to do this job that he was never designed to do, to go down to find out about yellow cake in Nigeria, when he'd never even been at the senior diplomatic level in Nigeria. And he didn't have to sign a deal with the CIA about confidentiality, and he didn't have to write a report when he came home, and he didn't even have to tell President Bush or Vice President Cheney what he was going to report. How corrupt is that? And yet look where it's gone. Well, that's like it was at Turner Broadcasting.
Everybody had input, everybody had a strategy, everybody had an agenda, and everybody had the perfect plan. And nobody's perfect, and nobody's the smartest person in the world, but at the same time, even a blind squirrel will find a nut. But it has to come from one direction, and they wouldn't give you that direction.
So going back to the 3 months I spent with Vince, he was an asshole, but there was only one asshole you had to deal with. It's kind of like, what's the difference in a bartender and a proctologist? A proctologist only has to deal with one asshole at a time. So with Vince, and I'm saying that in jest in a way it's a shoot, Vince. I respect you. You're a great, great businessman. You also know that I think you destroyed the business. End of story.
There's been a change in the way that the WWE does business. Vince has so much more on his plate now, and I'm not defending him or condemning him, but with 15 writers for 4 hours of television a week, and with the television studio, with everybody having a hand in things, there's not one clear vision, and it shows in the lack of pre-planning, because before WrestleMania was booked from year to year, and now what's going to happen on Monday, and you can't run a wrestling promotion, which is a manipulated business, and you can't run it like a last-minute thing, because you've got to have a plan.
They run it like a Hollywood thing, and to me, I still like the people involved in our business to have at least been bitten by it. It's kind of like you need to get down the mud, the blood, and the beer to know why you're in it and why you love it. You got to kind of be indoctrinated to some of the tradition. Yeah. You got to have a heart for it. If you don't have a heart for it, I mean, you see guys wake up all the time and think, I want to be a wrestling writer. And I want to write this fantastic script and just have these idiots go perform it. And that's really what they think. They just think, well, I can write this and you can go do it. They don't even know the human factor. They don't know they've never been, most of them, if they ever caught athletes' feet, it's from the shower. It never was from being an athlete.
Do you know of anybody in history that's ever been a good booker, and they call it writer now, that has not been, maybe the present company accepted, I don't know. But no, generally, you have to have been a performer, whether that be a referee or a manager or an announcer or a wrestler.
Yourself because you have been a performer. I'll tell you what, Jim Cornette, when I was real hot in Atlanta, I seconded somebody in our first Omni, and we didn't have the barricades then or anything to separate any of the crowd from us. I never felt so exposed sitting with my back turned to the audience outside the ring in my life. Once I was inside the ring where at least I could see them coming, I didn't ever care, but I hated sitting there and trying to ignore the audience who I know would like to cut me from end to end. And back, you got to realize, back in those days, it wasn't uncommon to get cut or stabbed or burned. And so, so I want to tell you, my hat's off to you all the time you've been outside the ring, especially when everybody knows that if you hit them in your best shot, you couldn't hurt anybody.
That's why I loaded the rocket.
Oh, I know how you loaded the rocket.
I wasn't fishing for a compliment on that one, but you have to have been a performer to. You can't be a great booking mind or a great finish guy or whatever without being a fan as well, because you have to know what the other fans would like to see. You can't just say, oh, this would be funny, or wow, this would be a kick in the head to do this. You have to be a fan. You have to be involved in the business, and to me, you have to have been a performer to know what those reactions are going to be like.
I think that's a good generalization. I don't think it always rings true, because we see some great football coaches that never played football. Well,
that's right. Somebody brought up Sam Muchnick, and that's an asterisk.
Sam Muchnick. But it's still, you have to have a commitment and love and a depth to you. And generally, you've spent time in the cars and making the trips and going to the places, and it's just deeper than waking up one day and wanting to write a script. So, but I mean, it's hard for me to critique.
I like Seinfeld. I don't know that I'd be able to write a script for it just because I watch it on television.
Well, it's hard for me to critique Vince because he's taken it to a new level and it'll never really come back, and he's been the most successful ever in a way, and yet in another way he's been the most hurtful to our business, if you really want to examine that too. But bottom line is he's very successful. I think he'll go through trends. I think the hardest thing for Vince is going to be surviving the fact that he's now a monopoly. Competition is good. It keeps you sharp.
Yeah.
And so when Turner Broadcasting was still in the game, it gave him something to hone his skills against.
Why run if there's nobody chasing?
Yeah. So now his only enemy is within.
Well, let me ask you this. It's a fact, and this is an indisputable fact, that if you add up the territories ratings from 20 years ago, there are fewer people now watching wrestling on television than at any point in the television era, probably. There are fewer people paying to see the matches live than at any point in the past 100 years, because there's fewer events. There's one company making more money than any company ever has, but the rest of them are not doing very well, and there's fewer wrestlers while there's some guys making 7 figures, there's fewer wrestlers than at any point in history making a full-time living at this business. So here's a question for you to answer in 2 minutes or less. What went wrong, and what can be done about it?
Well, I think you've already paraphrased everything I'd say as to what's wrong. Is that when I was still in it, there was like 20-something offices in North America. So first of all, if you didn't like me, you didn't have to work for me. You had plenty of places to go, which gives you a certain security based on your talent. You couldn't be controlled by me, and I couldn't decide your future. Also, it gave a lot of places for talent to learn and to grow. It's extremely hard for talent to develop and get the experience they need by working in front of small in television crowds or in the gym somewhere.
Yeah.
But then they've changed wrestling to where it's all choreographed now, which it wasn't then. And so all they have to do is have a great memory and go out and do all these moves that they've designed, and it shows. And yet, so then
there's not the emotional connection.
And that's why you got guys that are in their late 40s and 50s that are still on top, because they can still go out, and as limited as they are physically, they can still psychologically connect with the crowd because they know what they're doing from that perspective. So I don't know what can be done about it. Vince has raised the cost because, see, television's not an enterprising thing either. It's a good old boy system too. And most television guys, they think that the wrestling show they look at, it depends on the production and the production features and how many cameras shot it and all this stuff as to what makes it best instead of what the real content and storyline is. And the next thing, the biggest thing is, he can then, if you got a piece of talent built that was an integral that you needed to continue, and you invested all yourself in building that piece of talent, he can put them on his card anywhere and make them more money, so he can buy them out from under you. So that's predatory.
And he doesn't have to give you dates on Andre.
No, he doesn't have to give you anything back. They're gone. I mean, that's what and certainly he was very aggressive in doing that to establish his company, and he wrecked a lot of key promotions. I was just fortunate enough that I saw the handwriting on the wall and knew that if I didn't sell out to something, that I would be destroyed because I couldn't compete with the money he had.
Well, let's go back, because we've skipped ahead a little bit, but let's go back because after you left New York, the late 60s, you toured a little bit around. You went to the AWA, you worked for Vern Gagne.
Well, that was later. I went the first after New York. I came back, and then I went to Roy Shire and was only going to be there a few weeks and then take a tour of Japan.
San Francisco.
And Shire made me his champion. And I stayed there almost a year and learned tremendously. Roy Shires was a genius. He had some of the finest talent in the world. He had a guy that was one of the all-time greats, Ray Stevens. And Ray was teamed with Pat Patterson, and that's where Pat learned. Pat became a great performer in the WWF, or WWE, or whatever you want to call it. But he learned everything from Ray, and Ray at that time was probably the zenith. He was the epitome.
In the 60s, he was the best guy in the ring to be in the business.
Had the most versatility. And yet you could never say one guy was everything, because that, different people did it different ways. And let me tell you another key. Some guys have gotten over in one territory or one area and never gotten over in another area. Those guys, to me, are marginal. The guy that's a true superstar in our business is a guy that every place he went, he got over, which these guys today don't even know if they get over or not, because it's just one big mess.
It's hard to even tell.
But I mean, back in that era, if every place you went, you became the main eventer that was carrying the territory, that meant you were really, really good. And some guys only got over in one place and nobody even knew who they were anyplace else. And
Stevens, for 25 years, was on top everywhere he went.
That was phenomenal. And they had Kenji Shibuya out there, who was great. Jim Haiti was my tag partner. I was still at the stage where I had the charisma to impact the crowd, but they put Jim Haiti with me so I didn't screw up the matches. I mean, Jim Haiti was the fabulous mechanic. And I'll tell you what, we were in a match one time in San Jose, California, and Pat and Ray against Jim Haiti and I literally, my jaw was open most of the match at what I saw happen in the ring. It was so phenomenal, so beyond anything possible, And when we came in after the match, congratulating each other as having one of the greatest matches, Roy Shire sat us down and cussed us out for 30 minutes about killing the business. And you know what? He was right. He was right. He said, my gosh, the bumps you all took, not me, I gave them. I didn't ever take many bumps, I gave them. But he said, the bumps you all took, he said, I just had a match before you where the guy got counted out of the ring for going over the top rope to the floor. And you guys took bumps into the turnbuckles. Ray Stevens was the one that pioneered the one where your arm whipped him in the turnbuckle. He hit upside down, come up over the top, and as he'd go across and hit the pole, and he gaffed himself
on the way back down. Right?
I mean, that was mind-breaking at that time. It was, and so he said, you guys are destroying the business, and he screamed at us for 30 minutes, and he was right.
Because how do you follow it?
Not only how you follow it, but you kill the business. In other words, it's like the business today. Did the fans believe anybody ever really gets hurt? I'll bet you they were probably hollering fake when Owen Hart died. And I don't say that wrong because I loved Owen Hart.
But you have a point because you never know.
I'm making a really wild ass comparison out there.
But I see what you're saying because the people now are so convinced conditioned that everything is predetermined and planned that even a real life tragedy, people would say
they bomb 120-pound girls through tables and they get up and walk away.
Well, there you have it.
And I mean,
I've got that one on tape.
How ridiculous is that?
That's the thing, as a booker, as a promoter, and a lot of the guys don't understand. They think, okay, well, I took this great bump, or I did this great move, and the people went crazy, and then the booker, the promoter comes in and says, well, you dumb son of a bitch, what are you doing? The guy is looking to get over right then, and he wants to go somewhere else. The promoter or the booker is looking to take care of their business, and if you've got this going on all the time, when that guy leaves and somebody else comes in, they can't do it, how do you follow it? And the people go, oh, we've seen that shit, and where's your business? There's got to be some control. It's gotten so out of hand.
We had a deal come up in Phoenix, Arizona, where Gorilla Monsoon hit me in the head with a 40-pound ring bell. Anyway, Gorilla Monsoon hit me with a 40-pound ring bell. It was a potato, but that's the way I sold it. That Roy Shires had me taken in the ambulance to the hospital there in Phoenix. There was an airline strike, so I couldn't even get home. And my wife didn't know where I was. I'm in the hospital in Phoenix. But the people, see, they believed it because that didn't happen. It was something unusual that happened. He didn't want Gorilla to do it. Gorilla just improvised and hits me with this ring bell and it potatoed me. It didn't do. I just sold it because it looks so good. We had a deal that we're in Atlanta, Georgia one time where the top ring broke when Tim Woods, as Mr. Wrestling, was wrestling maybe, I don't know who the world's champion was, maybe it was Dory Funk at the time for the world's championship, and the top rope broke and he landed on the floor and he didn't get up and get back in the ring. He laid there. Had nothing to do with the finish. It got over like $1 million.
That's a great reason to come back. And see, that's something. People will still buy something that's properly presented, no matter what has been exposed. I did a deal in Knoxville where they took me to the hospital and the ambulance taped to a backboard and actually had the fans follow me to the hospital. And not only that, but one of them got into the X-ray room while I was taped down to the backboard. That was nerve-wracking. You pile drive Ricky Morton in Johnson City or whatever, and you've got girls crying because you stopped the show for 30 minutes and bring the ambulance in, and people go, well, this there's got to be something to this.
That's right.
You can make the boys believe it.
We did it with Ron Simmons with the title change at WCW in Baltimore.
Yeah.
I mean, people were crying in the crowd. It was back like the old emotion because we so caught them off guard with what we did. It was done so well that they got caught up in the emotion of it. And that's what wrestling should be. I was telling the Ring of Honor people here last night, there's times in our business, Killer Kowalski and I one time got into a thing in the ring and carried it into the dressing room where we had the boys in the dressing room actually picking sides and separating us. And Kowalski never wrestled a day in his life, and I got behind him on the deal and said, I'll suplex you on the floor. And they, don't suplex him on the floor, you'll kill him. And he's whispering in my ear, what the hell's a suplex? He didn't even know. And we rode together, we rode home together, and 5 guys called the office to snitch off on us, said we got in a fight in the ring. So this is among the guys that should know. If it's done well, it's very hard to tell the difference. And that's what the mark of the great worker is. A great worker should be able to even have the guys in the dressing room wanting to watch his match. Like one of the matches I watched here last night that you all asked me to stay and watch. I really enjoyed that
Christopher
match.
Daniels and Samoa Joe.
Really enjoyed their match. It was nice to see guys that went out and took their time and painted a picture and told a story.
Bill, in the first decade of your career, as we've been talking already, you got the chance to work with so many people that were influences, that were legendary historical figures in this business, and you've already mentioned from Toots Mondt, who practically invented the idea of booking in its rudimentary form back in the 20s and 30s at Vince McMahon Sr., Professor Roy Shire, then later Eddie Graham. There's not the opportunity, and we keep saying these guys don't have the opportunities. A lot of young upcoming wrestlers are going to cut their throats when they see us, but you literally had the opportunity to work with guys that represented 75, 80 years of professional wrestling history in the first 10 years you were in the business.
Yeah, it was a tough school, and I think we need to save Eddie Graham for that special place. I consider that's where I got my PhD.
Oh.
If you want to compare this to education, but that's what it was. It was an education because as you worked for these guys, you took something from them. You took the things that you thought they did really well, but oftentimes you were taking it subconsciously because you were experiencing it, and there were some things they did that really angered you and frustrated you often. But you learn from them. So yeah, I learned from Leroy McGurk, and we'll go into when I became his partner how trying that was to and what I had to learn and what I gained from that tremendously difficult era, because Leroy was extremely difficult to be with. But then I learned from Leroy. I learned from Ball Kestis. I learned how not to run a territory. And that was early on.
Who was Jim Barnett's
lieutenant? But at that time, Jim Barnett was busy because he was having his big love affair with Rock Hudson. And so, yeah, we all knew about Rock Hudson's secret life way before the public did. But and then I came back and I worked for Vince, and I learned so much from Bruno. I learned so much from Skoland. I learned a lot from the old timers. Were constantly teaching you, and the young guys, they were always critiquing you or teaching you. Joe Scarpa was
Jay Strongbow.
Yeah, Jay Strongbow was a great teacher. Jim Haiti was the greatest teacher. He was the guy that Shires teamed with me in California so that he could set the stage for the matches with Ray and Pat. And sometimes I remember coming in and doing a real wild comeback, and then Ray would say, "Now get the hell out and tag Haiti in before you destroy the match and us too," you know. It was just a great camaraderie. I remember one time Ray Stevens got so mad at me. He was teaching me how to take a bump right, that Roy Shires got mad and chewed us out after the match because we did the same thing too many times, and it was how I was going out of the ring wrong, and I was killing myself. So he threw me out of the ring about 6 times and was telling me how to do it right. So there was those kinds of things. So you were not only learning from the talent there, but you were learning from the promoter, and then under Shires I learned a tremendous amount under Shires. He was a genius. What I saw later was that Roy couldn't delegate anything. He couldn't include anybody. And see, if you have an open mind, there's so much more you can gather from several, as long as you understand how to package and channel it. That's a true gift, as you knew, because when you were in Mid-South, the product that went out there was a lot of people having their input. It was just my job as the owner and the guy running it was to make sure how it was channeled and the direction of it. And so then I worked for Vern Gagne, who was really different. Vern had a big grasp of the big picture, but didn't like details. And yet he loved athleticism and things like that. And the Crusher was a genius in his gimmick. He knew his gimmick. And not only that, he knew how to get a match out of anybody. He could figure out an angle. And I think you and I were discussing on the way to the Ring of Honor thing last night, the Algerian death match that Mad Dog Vachon came up with, and he and the Crusher were going to do in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Crusher asked me to be his second, and I thought it was such a horrible idea. But it would kill our business, and I would refuse to be his partner. And
which was both guys wrestling with the hoods over their head, which has later been redone.
Hood, with no eye holes or anything. And they were, in other words, they were totally couldn't see. And Crusher looked at me and said, "Hey, Cowboy, I can get anybody to be my partner." And I was about 3 or 4 years into the business. You're right, and I'm sitting in a good place here. So I agreed, and this match fractured me. It was a masterpiece. A masterpiece, so good that I took it years later and went into the Superdome with Dick Murdoch and Killer Carl Cox and called it a Texas Death Match or something, or a Jim Bowie match. And drew a ton of money with it. So you learned by the experience. You absorbed from everybody. Larry Hennig, Harley Race. There were so many greats I was around. And yes, you're right. By having the regional promotions, it gave you different places to get your education and perfect your skills.
Today, and different styles, because the crowds were educated to the style of wrestling in that promotion, and you would go from Texas to Florida to Minneapolis to New York, and it would be a completely different style of matches, would look completely different, and that way it's almost like now going to Japan, Mexico, England, and the United States for the different styles.
Well, today, if you look at it, they figure out your gimmick and your name before you learn how to perform.
Oh yeah, and that drives me crazy in OVW.
That's backwards.
And that's one of my drawbacks. What I learned from you is I try to teach guys what they need to know to get themselves over and to take care of themselves in the business. Whereas now a lot of times people want taught only, well, what gimmick are we going to put on him, so let's teach him just how to do that. Well, if that flops or if it don't get over and that's all he knows how to do, kick him out and get somebody else in. It's counterproductive to me.
Yeah, I think that that you will see something evolve out of somebody that they'll fit. And then the next thing is, generally the guys grow into their gimmick. It becomes them. It really is them. I mean, some people think it's just a gimmick and they leave it. No, it's them. They are that gimmick. Dusty Rhodes was, in his mind, the American dream.
Booking and promoting has gone from taking a Bill Watts. Okay, we got Bill Watts. Well, he's a cowboy. Okay, but you had that in you, and it was just brought out. And as you get more comfortable and more experienced, you know how to work it more. But they didn't take Bill Watts and give him Ricky Starr's gimmick. You weren't a ballet dancer.
No. Well, as a matter of fact, Sam Muchnick and I got a big argument in St. Louis. And the cowboy was just a way for people to identify with me, because I certainly wasn't a cowboy.
Right.
You know, if you'd went somewhere with me and tried to get me to ride a horse, I say, are you crazy? I don't want to ride the damn horse.
But gimmicks were more flavor to the meal rather than the whole picture.
Well, what you're talking about is who you were. And I'll never forget, we did a deal in St. Louis, and Sam came in with this idea that he wanted me to go out and get hurt and carried out of the ring. And I'm 300 pounds, and he said, Carpentier did this, and it got him over here to so much sympathy. I said, Carpentier is 220 pounds.
And 5'8".
He's a babyface. I'm a big, tough guy. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to get carried out in this first main event I'm doing here for you, and you think it's going to get me over. I refuse to do it. Which just fractured everybody. How can you dare to tell the president of NWA? Well, I wasn't going to do it. I say I was never intimidated. I mean, Vern Gagne one time used to call all the boys together in the auditorium in Minneapolis and say, you see this crack in the floor here? And they said, yeah. I said, that's what Bill Watts' jaw hit when I asked him to do a job and before he told me to stick it up my ass. So, you know, and I've always said, you know, it's crowded at the bottom of the ladder, not at the top. And one thing about it, if you got great ability, you can decide your own destiny, because there was nobody that was going to make me do what I didn't want to do. Now, the guys that were strictly workers that had no athletic ability, who were sometimes the biggest babies, you know, they could walk out on you or something, but in the ring it was no problem to, you know, you might not have the exciting match, but it was no problem putting their shoulders down.
Well, a lot of guys, we touched on this a minute ago, you talked about how you learn and absorb. A lot of the guys in the business, even some who would surprise people who were big draws at some periods of their time or their careers, they didn't have an interest in going into booking or promoting or whatever, but they knew how to do it because they did it, but they didn't delve into the psychology behind it, and that's what separated the stars from the superstars, in my opinion.
Well, I think everybody's different and given different gifts. I believe everybody is given special gifts, and I think some people develop their gifts more and some people don't. That's a choice. You're right. Some people didn't didn't care anything about being a booker. I didn't know I was going to be. Guys look back at me and say, "We always knew you were going to be."
But even if they didn't want to be bookers, they didn't bother to learn the other side of the business because that would have helped them in their wrestling career.
But again, Jimmy, that's a part of personal growth. Most people are not into personal growth. Most people just want to go through life and have everything handed to them. Personal growth is painful because you got to make mistakes.
Yeah.
See, if you be assured of personal growth and by making decisions that had no bad consequences, everybody might want to do it. But personal growth requires you to get out of a comfort zone, make some choices and decisions, and put your ass on the line. And so there's going to be failure and there's going to be victory. And some people can't handle the rejection and the failure. So, and then it's a lot easier to be a guy in the car telling everybody how great you are and what a great worker you are and how stupid the promotion is because they don't see it.
It's easier to say that's the shits than to say that's the shits and here's why.
Well, that's true, and it doesn't do you any good to be a critic unless you have a solution. That's kind of like the Democrats are today against the Republicans. All they can do is whine and criticize the war in Iraq and President Bush and this and that and the other, but they don't ever offer any substance. There's never an answer. What is the answer to the war in Iraq? Pull out and put Saddam back in power and act like we never were there? What is the answer? Draw down our troops? All that sends is a message of defeatism. You see what I mean? If you're going to tell me that, and I can say this, I don't think the war in Iraq has been properly executed. But the bottom line is, I think if you're going to give an alternative, you've got to have a solution instead of just taking and using as a buzzword all these things that they do.
With the last election, to me, with the situation going on, the war in Iraq, etc., it was Kerry's to win. It was the Democrats to win, and they just didn't do it.
Well, they can't because they don't have an answer.
They're
the greatest at demonizing and criminalizing, but they don't have an answer.
Tell me something. What are you going to do about it? I think that the what are you going to do about it was what they didn't get across to the public.
Well, the Swift boats buried John Kerry. They exposed alive his war record, and then no matter what, they couldn't cover that up.
But back to wrestling. In Minneapolis, you had a good run. It worked with a lot of the great talent there.
You learned a lot from Carbo.
Carbo, who was one of Vern Gagne's lieutenants. Then that's when you made a big step because you went from there. Didn't you go back at that point to Oklahoma and buy in?
That came about is that Leroy was so frustrated in that he had lost control of things and the talent that he knew from when he could see, they were getting older and older, and so he was dealing with a lot of people and a lot of things.
And plus, it had to be a tremendous disadvantage, even though Leroy McGuirk had his weaknesses and his strong points. It had to be a tremendous disadvantage for a promoter in wrestling to be blind. Talk about robbing you blind.
Yeah. But he was a hierarchy. He had a lot of ability, and he knew he had a lot of innate psychology. He always kept everybody. He kept mixing the thing where he kept them all against each other, and then he'd just sit and pick it off. And so, he had a great bit of intrigue going, but it finally was collapsing on him. And one thing about it, somehow in the short times I'd worked for him, and I used to go back on occasion and work with him, and he saw that I had great ideas as to what I was going to do, and I was always going to do the right thing for the territory, even though I'd come back as a big star and work, and it'd sell out or this or that. He saw that. And so something impressed him, and so he called me and he said, I want you to come home, and he said, I want to make you a partner. And so that was a big deal because I was making a lot of money for Vern and enjoying life, but that was a challenge. And then typical of Leroy, which you never knew what his deal today would change tomorrow. Then he decided, well, really, I'm scared of that because Bill has no experience in this. So then he called Vern and Fritz, and he wanted them to be the partners, and then to bring me in to do the booking and be his partner. So then they all of a sudden, out of the magnanimousness of their heart, offered me 5%, and Fritz and Vern were each going to get 40%, and Leroy was going to keep the rest. And I said, not today, not any day. I'm not taking that. And Fritz and Vern said, take it or you're out. And I said, screw you, I'm out. And I gave my notice to Vern and started booking some of his stars to Oklahoma. And I called Leroy and said, I'm coming home, I'll make my own deal with you. And Vern came up and said, I hear you're booking guy. I said, you're right. He said, you can't do that. I said, who the hell are you? You can't stop me from doing anything. And so then he and Fritz all of a sudden said, we better talk to Bill. So the deal started with them each getting 20% and me getting 19% and Leroy getting let's see. Can't remember. Hodge, Leroy wanted Hodge to have 10%. And so anyway, that's how the deal started. And Fritz and Vern's job was to furnish us with talent, and I was supposed to book it, and yada, yada, yada. And I spent the next 3 years in that miserable hellhole. And we transformed it, and I learned a tremendous amount. The biggest thing I learned was because of Leroy's handicap, and his handicap was that he was blind, and because he'd lost one eye as a kid and he lost the other eye later on in his life, he was very bitter, and he was an alcoholic, and he was paranoid. And he had all these great aspects, but all these other things that about him prepared me so, because when I do the booking, then some stooge would get in his ear, or he and Dorothy would sit down and count how many times this guy had wrestled or that, and they'd tear it all up. And he wanted to write the newspaper story, because he was a writer, of what the next match was going to be before you had it. So I had to learn how to be prepared on not only what this match was going to do, but where I was going with everything.
Right.
And I had to also have my reasoning well built so I could defend it to my own partner, who all of a sudden I'm making him more money than he's ever made. And I had no help from Vern and Fritz. They sent one or two guys, and the guys didn't want to be there, so they couldn't make them be there. And we had the hardest time in the world. So I went through about 3 years of that. And
so you had to develop your logical approach to booking early, because you had to justify it to your partners.
And his wife and every stooge.
Much less having the fans buy it. You had to justify it before it got out of the office.
I had to learn how to start getting rid of the stooges. And there's a lot of interesting stories how I got rid of different people that I didn't want to be there. And how I finally blew up a couple times at Leroy and chased everybody out of the office. I mean, I just let my temper reign there a little bit, which was easy for me to do since I had such a bad temper anyway. And so I started transforming that into the model I wanted. But I got, it's a funny thing. I think as people, as human beings, the thing that's so important, we all want to be valued. And we want to be accepted. And especially by those that we respect or that we love or think love us. The biggest thing is value. How does your mother and dad value you? How does your employer value you? How do you value me? How do I value you? And I think that's one thing is I love you, I respect you, I value you. That's why we have a good relationship. So that's what I wanted from Leroy. All I wanted was to be valued and to be accepted. And with Leroy, you never could get valued because he only valued himself. And you never could get accepted because you were a threat to him because he was so insecure. He was insecure emotionally and insecure physically. So you could never get beyond that hurdle.
And this is a tough business to be in if you're doing it just for the money, because you have to live it 24 hours a day. You have to think it, breathe it, eat it, sleep it. And
I invested everything I had just buying in.
But I mean, for any of the guys who think, I get a big contract and you have to love the business.
There weren't big contracts in that day. See, you didn't ask for a big contract. All you asked was for the opportunity, because nobody's going to give you a big contract. There were no guaranteed deals. I mean, it was $25 minimum, and that was it. And that wasn't even in Canada. You didn't even get 25 minimum generally. So the bottom line is all you asked for was an opportunity. And so with Leroy,
and recognition if you did the job.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. So here with Leroy, I've transformed this place to where it's making money, and yet my partner is shooting me in the back all the time. And I was so burned out. And with Jack Briscoe, who was a dear, dear friend, and Jack had gone through all that because nobody would book Jack and give Jack a chance. He was just doing jobs, and Eddie Graham found him. And Eddie Graham took Jack to Florida and tried him out to see how tough he was. And when Jack stretched everybody down there, Eddie said, I found my guy. And he started schooling Jack, and Eddie schooled Jack, and Jack became an awesome, awesome worker. Well, Jack had been whispering to Eddie, I can guarantee you, there's somebody you got to get down here, Bill Watts. So Eddie started studying me, and I didn't even know it. So then the thing in Georgia came up, to make a long story short, and that's a whole other chapter.
Around about 1972.
Eddie brought me into Georgia to look me over, ended up giving me a piece of Georgia with the ultimate goal of having me come in and be owner in Florida, and all those things transpired.
And just so everybody knows what the landscape was, this was at the point in time where Ray Gunkel, who was a partner along with several other people in the Georgia Championship Wrestling office, Ray Gunkel had died, and Gunkel attempted to take his his part of the company. There was opposition to that, and the
well, you're trying to.
I'm trying to gloss over, but
that's another chapter.
But basically, it was
a different chapter.
But it was a promotional war in Atlanta with 2 offices.
Yeah,
and
Ray Duncan had already decided to do the double cross.
Well, but the established NWA office
died in the middle of his double cross,
and All South with Ann Gunkel.
She was interesting.
Most of the talent.
All the talent.
Everybody except the referee and Bob Armstrong.
Bob Armstrong, the greatest guy.
They left the NWA office, went to the new promotion, so you were brought in to be the booker for the established NWA office, along with talent from different territories all over there.
The booker was Leo Garibaldi. I just happened to be the boss.
Okay.
I was Eddie.
And Leo Garibaldi, another legendary name.
And a guy that I fought with tooth and nail, but the fighting with Leo led to big things. See, the difference in me is Leo and I fought on so many things, but when Leo was right, I saw he was right, and I went with his stuff. And that's what makes you better. Right. It makes you better. You can't have. That's why I used to tell Vince, if you got everybody sitting around you telling you how wonderful you are and yes-manning you're not getting anything. You're being cheated. You want people that challenge you and contest you. But then if you said, all right, I've evaluated all this, but this is the way we're going, then they all get on board to make this work the absolute best. That's what a true team does.
And unfortunately, I think there's a lack of dissenting opinion these days in a lot of cases, which is why we see some of the things we see.
Well, Vince or anybody, Vince is the only guy up there doing it, I guess, but he's got to finally figure out how he values the people and their opinions. And, I think that's why Jim Ross's feelings are so badly injured right now. Jim Ross was such a loyal, faithful employee for Vince for so many years and stayed with him through thick and thin and was, and felt that the way he was handled on their television as he left to get serious major surgery was a slap in his face that totally made a statement that he had no value. So I think it's more about. And
at the same time, I don't see how that enhanced business.
Well, I've never thought it made it business better for wrestlers to beat up an announcer. It makes the whole promotion a whore. I mean, the promotion is a total sham whore. To think that you would be able to allow your wrestlers to come beat up your announcer.
Without any kind of punitive action,
period. It's kind of like Eddie Graham asked me one time, and this was a great lesson I learned from Eddie Graham. I was starting to get beyond the edge with Gordon Soley on television, where I would override him and I would start insulting him and he was the host of Florida Championship Wrestling. And Eddie asked me, he called me, and Eddie always took a while to get around to his point. He was so smooth, but finally said, I was just thinking. Johnny Carson's the biggest name in show business at that time with The Tonight Show. If you were a guest on Johnny Carson's show and you insulted him, do you think you'd last long on that show or ever be asked back? And I said, oh, no. He said, well, we know that Gordon works for the wrestling office and that you're a partner in our office. But to the people, Gordon is the host of Florida Championship Wrestling. You take any credibility he or we have as a promotion away when you insult him. And then that changed me. The lights just went on. I said, good gosh, you're right. How dare I insult Gordon Soley? I can do anything else I want, but I shouldn't insult Gordon Soley if he's truly the host of this show.
The logic.
And you got in trouble, didn't you?
I did it once. The logical. The viewers sitting at home want to watch the program not for I guess for all intents for the bells and whistles. For the meat of the matter is, it has to make sense. When I watch a movie and it's the horror movie, and of course there's the old house and it's haunted and it's lightning outside and everything, and the girl all alone, instead of staying there calling for help on a cell phone or staying there, she's got to go in the house to find her friend. I'm not going in that house. I'm sitting there in the chair going, I'm not going in the house. You're an idiot.
Right.
You're a dumb shit.
Yeah.
So there has to be something logical to draw her into that house. Did something chase her from outside? Whatever. Wrestling has gotten so illogical that now I think people are sitting there instead of being sold tickets, they're sitting there picking out the flaws in the logic. Well, why would he do that?
Yeah, it's a movie, and you're 100%. Dusty was the first one who used to call them movies, and you're right. If you can't engage the people's emotion to where they're involved in the storyline, then you've lost your reason. That's again why we used to have the arena dark with just the ring lights. You don't go into a movie and watch a movie with the lights on.
Well, it's distracting.
They turn out the lights, so you're sitting there with your popcorn and your drink, and all of a sudden it's so scary, and you might scream, you might shake, or whatever. But if somebody's sitting next to you, you'd never dare to do that if the lights were all on.
Oh, well,
you can lose yourself in the
when
movie.
I first went to work for Vince, and I'm watching the monitor at television, and the place is lit up like a Christmas tree, and the lights never go down when the match starts. I'm like, why don't we turn the lights down?
Because they want.
We want to see all the people are here. I know the people are there. I saw them when the guys came in. Now I want to watch the match, and I can't focus because everything is lit up. The attention is not there.
Well, they've re-educated the public. That's a different deal.
But with Eddie Graham, with the situation in Atlanta, that was the beginning of your PhD, because you got involved with booking in Atlanta and then later in Florida, and get a chance to work with Eddie Graham.
I've done the booking in Oklahoma, and then I went into a situation that was what they called a wrestling war, which was very interesting. That's where I figured out in the process that competition was good, because it created a bigger wrestling awareness.
For a while, both offices were selling out.
Sure. And so I learned a lot there, but I learned so much from Eddie, and I think the reason I call it my PhD is he used to tease me. He said, I was a junior high dropout, guy from Tennessee, no education. And he said, and you're a college guy from the University of Oklahoma. Why would you come to work for me? And I said, I came here to get my PhD. And he loved it. And he truly was. There was a bond with he and I that developed, was earned, and he really touched my life. And
he was responsible for several people who went on to become bookers of some note. Dusty learned under Eddie Graham.
Well, Dusty had to survive me in 2 or 3 instances, too. Yeah, see, that he got that same thing you're talking about by going around and learning from this guy, this guy, this guy. He put those pieces together, and then he formulated his style.
And Eddie had a close relationship with Vince Sr. going back to the days when the Golden Grahams were in New York, were the Kings of Madison Square Garden. Yeah. So there was, even though it wasn't publicized and the fans didn't know about it, there was a lot of similarities in talent exchanges between Florida and the WWF, even down to a lot of their newspaper ads looked the same. There was even though it wasn't publicized, there was a kinship there, and Eddie would be able to get guys regularly booked into Madison Square Garden as special events.
Those old relationships, which I didn't value when I first got into promotion because I was more in rebellion, those old relationships had great meaning on them. You remember, my Mid-South was the only wrestling operation that used the NWA World's Champion without being a member of the NWA, which was good for them, they realized, from a point of view, since they were operating under consent decree. And so there was a lot of undercurrents that happened.
One of the influences that Eddie Graham had on you and on a lot of people that worked with him, and I've heard this from so many people in the business, he was one of the great finish men. And it would be long, it would be complicated, it would be involved, but it wasn't a situation where, okay, top this and top last week and do it. It was something that made sense as far as the story that he wanted to get across. So how hard was it to adapt to learning or to conceiving of his style of finish?
Like a thirsty man in the desert. You just drank him up. You're right. Eddie Graham was so far advanced. You realize I'd been around Leroy and Roy Shire. Roy Shire's finishes were pretty good productions, and Roy Shire's told you everything to say on your interview, so pretty soon everybody's personality sounded like Roy Shire's. And Vern's finishes were not that intricate. And certainly in New York, the finishes were generally not as intricate when you compared them to what Eddie done. So coming around Eddie, because the finish to Eddie was the thing that melded the individual and unique features of the talent involved into the line and direction and where you wanted the people to be. But along the way, had all the blind corners and the intrigue and the false finishes, so that nobody ever knew when the real final thing was going to get there. And
he could see it in his head, couldn't he? When he was telling it to you, he was seeing it happen, because I've heard guys say he'd give them a 7-minute finish, and they would go through it almost exactly as it was told to him with the timing and everything, and then they'd come back and he'd say, well, where was the third drop kick?
Yeah, it was hard at first until you converted into his mind, which, as I became a disciple of his in this business, it became my makeup and my mind, and then I didn't understand why people didn't get it the same way. But I remember when I first got under his influence in Georgia, and then I was on the phone to him every day from there, even though I was running the things happening in Georgia, and we would discuss finishes, and we'd discuss where I was going with the angles and where I was going with my booking, which was really giving him an insight to me for what he wanted in Florida. So that's when I really got to grow until I got down to Florida. And then in Florida, of course, it was a whole other world. But yeah, his things were, two things I learned from him. I learned three huge things, and I say three, there were so many things, but these are major. The finishes were productions. The other thing was that how to get the utmost mileage out of every single thing that you were doing. You didn't ever leave anything and drop anything and that had value. It was always going to be added to and more continued. He didn't let you just as a booker fly off to this tangent or that tangent. The other thing was that if you were going to book up to our big showdown in Florida was the Bayfront in St. Petersburg. So you had Tampa on Tuesday, the Bayfront on Saturday, and Tampa back on Tuesday on the weeks that the Bayfront ran. He wanted to sell out Tampa on the Tuesday, sell out the Bayfront on the Saturday, and then come back the following Tuesday and sell out Tampa again.
20 miles apart.
20 miles apart. Same television market. That was tough. All right, so I got to where I could get this one sold out, and this one, the Bayfront sold out, and then we'd come back to Tampa and die. And he wasn't happy with that, but he had a way of leading you there instead of beating you up. Because, see, he valued me. He accepted me. So he had to then validate and compliment. So he started booking with me. He said, all right, what are you going to have in the Bayfront? Then what are you going to have leading up to it? Now then, what are we going to come back with Tampa? Because this is not good enough. I want you to book beyond the Bayfront. Now that's one thing
what you had in Tampa.
Man understands. See, he understands that his key event is the big pay-per, the granddaddy of his pay-per-views. What's the name of it?
WrestleMania.
WrestleMania. So he already knows what his main event's going to be in WrestleMania. Then everything's got to build to that and beyond it. So he has that far-reaching mind. So that's what Eddie saw.
So what you had in Tampa impacted what happened in St. Petersburg, and what happened in St. Petersburg impacted what you came back with in Tampa, so that people could follow the story.
Had to. And so it all tied together. So when you learned, and then the other big thing was he'd been burned so many times, and from him I pioneered more with him building the super spectacular card. And I'll never forget, mine came because I had so much talent down there drawn to what we were doing. But I went to him
at that time that you had Tim Woods, Mr. Wrestling.
No, he wasn't. That was in Georgia. Tim was more over in Georgia. He wasn't a big star for us in Florida.
Well, no, was Johnny Walker was wrestling too down there at that point in time.
He was a big star in Georgia.
Well, I missed both of them. But yeah, you had Jack Briscoe,
became the world's champion. We had Dusty Rhodes.
Buddy Colt was hot at that point in time, was he not?
Colt was good. Colt was solid. Yeah, but
so you had a lot of talent.
Oh, Bobby Duncombe. We really created the thing with Gary Hart and Pak Song Nam and Hart's Army,
which led to the formation of the American Dream, which was one of the most memorable angles in history.
Which happened out of a lot of things. Let's go back to that, because I had to almost fire Dusty there too. Dusty hates me because every time I come in, I have to get his attention and let him know who's boss. But he's an awesome guy. I love him to death. It's just that if he's working for me, he has to understand that I'm calling the final say. I have the final say. I have the swing vote. Something every guy wants, even in a marriage, and doesn't get. Okay. So anyway, the package concept came. I had all this talent. And I went to Eddie and I said, we got 9 matches tonight in Tampa. We got that much talent. We got to book them. And I said, from the 3rd match on, they're main events. My gosh, how do I keep them, first of all, happy? Right. And I have to have a production finish for every one of them, since they're such outstanding talent. I'm crying. I'm hurting so bad because I mean, your brain's like a sponge, and you run out. You just get it wrung out. And he said, "Kid, you have more talent than I've ever had here. Just keep doing what you're doing." He just switched it right back. But then he stepped right in, and we'd kick these finishes around, and everything was a giant production and a finish. But what I also learned from that was, because realized I'd come out of Oklahoma where I was the main event. The only reason I had to be the main event is I was the only guy I knew would show up the next night.
Right.
In a territory that big and that brutal.
You're never going to fire. You're never going to quit on yourself. You're never going to walk out on yourself. Yeah. You're never going to fire yourself.
But so the first guy that I truly built beyond me in Oklahoma was when I came back from Florida was Dick Murdoch. And I'll never forget coming out of the arena in Shreveport when the fans ran past me to Murdoch for his autograph. It pissed me off because my ego came in. I said, "Wait a minute, I'll show him and everybody who the real star is." And I had to have that heart-to-heart talk with myself in the mirror in the motel and say, "Hey, you idiot, get your melon head out of this basket and back down to earth. You've done it. You've created a star the fans like more than you. Now you can, first of all, get a day off every now and then.
Yeah.
And you've got somebody else that when you're together on the card is going to be bigger box office." But that makes Murdoch in the driver's position. You better start building another star in case his head gets as big as yours is. And that's when I understood that you had to have a package of stars.
And that's when you've got the package show and you've got the spectacular, and if somebody gets hurt or drops out or gets fired or whatever, you've still got somebody to take up the slack. You've got protection.
You got some. I mean, let's face it, the real money matches, there are only one or two matches.
Right. There's some things that can't be replaced.
Some things that are icing,
they're
icing on the cake. They won't draw on their own, but they sure are good on the crowd, and they do round out the demographic.
Right.
But you've got to, it's kind of like... we found out that with my tough guys, we had a hardcore tough audience that liked the tough guys. Then when we brought the rock and roll in, we started getting the teeny boppers and everybody else. And then if we booked them the right way with the right story, it exploded. But so you had to add to the mix to make the overall package. So anyway, creating this package effect show was a big leap in our business, because you got to realize when I came into Oklahoma, they might have 8, 9 guys, 10 guys on a card. They'd have two preliminaries, and if you were a tag team main event, you worked 2 warm-ups, and then an intermission and came back to the tag team.
Well, I'll tell you something that I learned, that I saw firsthand. The same idea done incorrectly or done correctly, it means the world. You can draw money with even the most simple concept if you present it to the people right. And the case in point is when we were down there, they had something in Memphis which very much like the Algerian death match, the blindfold battle royal. But in Memphis, it was generally for a spot show where you got 10 guys on the card, so we're going to add an extra match where it looks like a bigger card, everybody's working twice, nobody gets paid any extra, put hoods over their head, 10 guys, and the last man in the ring is the winner of some fictitious amount of money, just for spot shows. When Dundee was booking for you, we were down there, you took that idea, but you presented it as the main event in the bigger buildings, especially in between programs, when you really needed something to garnish the card up. You presented it as a 20-man blindfold battle royal where there's 20 guys that are 250 pounds each that are going to be totally blind, and everyone's fighting for themselves. And if you get thrown over the top rope blindfolded, it's 9-foot drop to the concrete, somebody's going to die, folks. There's going to be murder, mayhem, carnage, and pandemonium down there this week. Come see it. The blindfold battle royal drew. It drew better than an advertised match between 2 guys for the title because it was different, but it was presented as important, as dangerous, as a spectacle, instead of, oh yeah, there'll be a 9-man blindfold battle royal.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's the presentation. It's not the idea all the time. It's the presentation.
That's Elmer Wheeler was a great sales motivator, and he always said, sell the sizzle, not the steak. And so you had to sell the sizzle. If you didn't sell the sizzle, I'll tell you another thing, just the reverse. The first time we did it worked when we had a 10 midget battle roll over the second rope. And we took the top rope off. It drew one time because midgets really didn't draw. They were an attraction.
They were on the card for
the kids and the families and yada yada yada. But you couldn't draw with a midget main event. But when that then the one time we had an ice storm, and our referees didn't make it and anything else. And Dick Murdoch, my top heel, and I'm wrestling that night in the main event, went out and refereed the midget match. I got there late too because of the ice. I see him and I'm going to kill him. He's down on his knees, so he's the right height for him. Then he took a backdrop from one of them, and I'm thinking, oh God! But you know,
and Dickie was another one of those guys like Stevens who was so natural, but he had that sense of humor.
When he came back in that main event with me, he still had the heat. He just had that unique personality that could do anything.
He could with an unlikely looking body.
Oh yeah, but never got tired. He
amazing physical
his aerobics. He had that aerobic system. You can go all night.
Yeah, and
like Dory Funk Jr.
So in Florida, you got the opportunity to learn the idea of the package show, and at that point, that's when you came back, and that's when the seeds of Mid-South Wrestling really got started.
Well, and I also learned editing because they were shooting everything on film, and they had a Jerry Prater in that office, and Gordon Soley's son were doing the editing, and so we could take the angles in the house and shoot them on film because you couldn't edit tape then. They didn't have the method of the computer editing. And so you couldn't, and so you had to, and you could turn an angle into anything you want. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget one time when Dory Funk Sr. was still alive. He was supposed to do a Texas death match with Jack Briscoe, who they were grooming to be the world's champion when it was Dory Funk that was the world's champion. And Dory Sr. didn't do the job the way he was supposed to. One of those political things, and so he was kind of laughing like he'd stuck it up Eddie's rear, his good friend. But he forgot that Eddie and them were filming it. So by the time it got through with the film and the commentary, Eddie said, "What a fabulous job you did! I'll send you a copy for your TV." He had destroyed Dory.
There was a story also at one point about production halt. There was a story at one point about, I think it was in was it Abilene? Don Lawman Slatton. Didn't he try to steal the NWA title from Harley Race by double-crossing him? And he had a film camera way up in the back row of the bleachers where nobody would see it, but because it was a dark building, the film came out. They were so small you couldn't see who it was even wrestling.
I don't know.
But in the old days with film and before the advent of videotape and everything, it was tough sometimes. But the film from the arenas, because I remember seeing the clips that you used to do from like Jackson, the Fairgrounds Coliseum, Jackson, Mississippi. Some of the arenas, the gritty, grainy, one-camera shoot superimposed into a more professionally done studio program or like the show at the Irish McNeil Boys Club in Shreveport made it seem special. It was something that the fans weren't supposed to see. Yeah, it was a news report. You weren't supposed to see that. And not only did it help the house shows, it furthered the angles, but it also gave, instead of making people stay home to watch on television now the entire event, it gave them 2 or 3 minutes of what they could have seen out of a 2-hour show. Well, some people are going, oh, wow, we wish we'd have been there.
Now, you got to realize that my departure in that direction had everybody in the wrestling business really saying it'll never work. In that my shows, I hated so badly myself formula matches that I put main eventers against main eventers all the time on my wrestling shows. And that was totally the opposite from the big territories. New York and them, it's a superstar against a nobody. The same job guide is when beating everybody, and then you paid to see the superstar. Well, I had a small population, but I had 60% ratings. Why? Because I figured if the people would tune in to see the show and I created enough excitement, they'd pay to come see the matches. And we were running those towns every week. And when you had a 60% share of the audience in some of those towns, that was awesome. So we did a lot of things like that. And you remember, we'd even put sometimes a main eventer that was in the main event in the town.
The first match ever, anywhere between the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express, which went on to draw more money in several territories than any other tag match I can think of for that period of the 80s. The first match between them was on Mid-South Television. And at the time I was sitting.
Midnight Express was created at
I came. I'd come from Memphis, and I was like, okay, wait a minute, this is our first match. These are the guys I thought we were going to have a program with, and we're having our first match on TV. We're giving it away for free. And I was thinking,
what? The first time as a team, even.
Yes,
because you guys were a team.
We'd only been together for like the 8 weeks we'd been doing your television. All of a sudden, we're with the Rock and Roll. I'm thinking, what the heck? But then I realized afterwards what happened was the Rock and Roll were scheduled to work work with the Russians. So we have 5 minutes of Midnight in Rock and Roll, which was blistering action all the way through, and the Russians run in, and ding, 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 there's a DQ, and now the people wanted to see the Midnight in Rock and Roll again. What would have happened? Wow, it was good, we want to see more of it, and could the Rock and Roll beat them, or were they not going to win? So by putting the main events on television in the proper perspective, sold the right way with the right finish,
well, you remember
you made people want to see it more.
Our last match was always one fall of television time limit remaining. And we had a lot of matches that that went off the air. And sometimes then we would save it and bring it back the next week to show them what happened.
And every once in a while you'd actually have it end early and have a standby match because you had to sometimes.
Yeah. We always had standby matches booked. And then another thing we did, if it got too bloody, we put up our own slide. Because this is beyond what we thought that children and families should see. Well, I'm telling you, see, you just took it away from them. Oh my gosh, they're dying then to know what happened. But it looked like we were credible as a promotion and that we weren't doing violence for the sake of violence. See, I think when you get out here and you manipulate violence for the sake of violence, you're losing any credibility. For instance, if when Junkyard Dog was blinded, which was the biggest thing that we did until Rock and Roll Express and then came in, but it was the biggest angle we ever did. If I'd have let them blind him intentionally and then go ahead and wrestle, what would my credibility have been as a promotion? Because then you should be able to walk up and shoot the guy and still wrestle.
Not be punished.
So you had to have
you manipulated it so that it was plausible deniability and that it was an accidental.
Well, everybody knew it was on purpose.
And there's Michael Hayes going, it was an accident, we didn't mean to do it. And everybody knew he was full of shit, but it was plausible deniability that it was an accident, so that way the promotion didn't have to take action, because you can't legitimately do that in any kind of sport and not suffer some kind of recrimination. So the promotion didn't get the heat. The heels got the heat, and the people paid the promotion money to see the heels get beat.
Yeah, you want the heat on the heels.
And that's a question. With now everybody, of course, you follow a trend, and Vince McMahon pulled it off because he's a great television personality as a heel promoter. But now everybody in the world wants to be a heel promoter, a heel matchmaker, a heel booker, a heel commentator, some kind of heel. You can't have the evil in control of the company, because then why would people support it? In my opinion, it's not logical to me.
Oh, we had Bill Clinton for 2 terms as president. And now they want Hillary. So, no, I should. Excuse me. Now I'm feeling my political conservativeness.
I think we've had enough President Clintons myself, but
and you stop and think. If Hillary runs, the only thing she's ever done has been the result of what Bill's done.
but how can? Or does it just not matter anymore because everybody knows it's just gaga?
Yeah, I think you're to the point now where it doesn't make any difference because everybody knows it's all. There's really no division. Yeah, it's kind of like I used to try to tell them at WCW. I said, John Wayne kept some mystery. He didn't really shoot and kill the Indians in the Cowboy Indian movies, but you didn't see him ride off in the sunset with them at the end of the movie.
Yeah, they didn't get them to dust each other off.
Today in wrestling, they get there together and they leave together. Yeah, it's all one big happy deal. So you're not going to ever reestablish the mystery in this. That's why let's face it. That's why the UFC was taken off, where it's become the hottest pay-per-view ticket going, is because people tune in. They know they're going to see a tough contest.
Well, and I'm not saying this because you're sitting here, because I've said this before in several of the interviews, and I've said it to a lot of people I've talked to. But of all the territories I worked in, believe me, we drew a lot of money with Jim Crockett and the NWA. We had a lot of good houses. As a matter of fact, with the bigger populations and the bigger buildings, in some cases we had bigger houses than we did in some areas of Mid-South. But I've never been involved in wrestling crowds, in buildings where the emotion, the intensity of the emotion, you could feel it. It would hit you. It would slap you in the face, whether it be hatred for you or love for your opponent or whatever. But you engendered not only credibility but emotion, to the point where we would walk into the bank to cash our check, or we would have a lawyer stop us on the street and say, "Good luck." Not have a good show or a good show I saw last week, but good luck. The cops, who actually picked up Bob Eaton and Dennis Condrey one night in Cochetta, Louisiana, coming back from Shreveport to Alexandria. The cop that was sitting there on the desk, I guess he was the sergeant or the sheriff or whatever, was pissed at them. What'd you use on them boys last week to win the belts on television? And of course, Dennis is right. It was ether, you know. But the cops bought it. But the point is, it was plausible, it was logical, and you got emotion. And there was no territory where a heel was more hated or a babyface was more loved. And engendering that emotion is the whole key to drawing.
Well, and it took a lot of effort to try to maintain that credibility, and we went to extremes to maintain it. You know, if a guy wanted to try out to be a wrestler, we made him sign a legal release. We made him put up enough money that the guy that I selected to stretch him made some money for stretching. But we stretched him right. And matter of fact, remember the last time that I got mad that Dr. Death hadn't done it right, and I like to kill the guy, and they got him down to the emergency room, and I'm scared that I'm going to lose everything in the lawsuit because he's dying.
Yeah, I've never seen an unconscious man wandering around like a zombie before, but and a lot of people say, well, you know, this stuff, it's all fake, and how dare you lie to people. It's not like, I got news for you. You know, Mick Jagger's not the greatest singer in the world, but the Rolling Stones are the world's greatest rock and roll band because they're marketed that way. They have talent. They've got a history. They're engendering emotion. It's entertainment, and the people were getting a value for their money.
That's right. And let me tell you, if a promotion, if you ever forget that, as a wrestler, if you ever forget that, you know, sometimes you could take something so long that you lose a lot of your crowd and you're down to just a few people, and you come out there and you think, oh crap, and the guys are tired from traveling and everything else, and then you set up a real production where maybe they're going to get juiced, bust each other up, bang, 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 and they're thinking, well, why build this? If you ever lose that base, if you ever lose that loyal base like Ring of Honor has, if you ever lose them, it's over.
The core.
So when you have that crowd there, you are obligated as a professional. You're obligated to go in there and give them your very best. I remember one time Dusty and I were so tired. Remember, I could get nine matches out of you guys. I'd double 2 days on you. And so, you know, and Dusty is so tired, and I'm so tired. When he came in, we were doing the double bull ropes everywhere. And then we walked into Tulsa, and we're coming out. We were so tired we couldn't hardly walk.
And that was Sunday night, the end of a long week.
And boy, that crowd popped, and Dusty looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, "It's the mud, the blood, and the beer, baby. Let's go give it to them." And we went out there and busted our cans, and Joe Hamilton and I think Frank Morrell were in that match. And matter of fact, I think one of them's eye got split with that bell so bad that I thought his eyeball actually came out. But we gave them our all, because without your fans, you got nothing.
When you work the people, but you give them the match that they want to see, which stands up to what the expectation they have, they get their money's worth. That's not lying to anybody.
No, they get their value, or else they wouldn't.
Exactly.
When they feel screwed.
When you false advertise, or when you bill a match that doesn't take place, or you change the card around, or people lay on their ass, that's when you're lying to the people.
Remember how in our interviews I made crystal clear what the parameters of the match were? In other words, everything we had Reeser do was say what the rules and and everybody concentrated on making sure that the fans understood what they were going to accomplish in that match.
I still have your memo. Gentlemen, I know you are all now superstars. However, some rules still need to be adhered to. When you have a stipulation match, talk about the stipulation. If it's tape fist match, do your promos with your fist tape. If it's a bull rope match, have the bell, have the rope. Whatever it is, show the people, explain to them what they're going to see when they pay their money. You don't go to see a movie. Let's go to the movies tonight. What do you want to see? A movie? Does the marquee on the theater say movie? No. So why do they expect people to come see wrestling? Well, who's wrestling? We're not sure yet. We're going to change the card again. Depends on what they do on Monday. Well, I want to know what I'm buying a ticket to see.
Well, you remember my rules. If you got out in a bar and got in a fight, if you got whipped, I fired you.
Except me. If I want to fight, you'd have fired me.
I'd have gone and found the mark and fined him. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, when I heard you got whipped, the first thing I did was look at your fist to see if you was a pitcher or a catcher.
Yeah.
Jimmy Garvin. Remember, I brought him in, and he was going to be.
You didn't encourage guys. Now let's please once again, no more misnomers on what Bill's saying. You didn't encourage guys to get in bar fights. You just said, "You dumb son of a bitch! If you're going to go out and get drunk and get in a fight, don't lose. You better win because it's my territory."
Because you were a reflection of our business.
Exactly.
The other thing, Jimmy Garvin, I brought him in, was going to make him the young demographic and had him dressed all up on TV and everything. I go to a town and he's walking in flops and shorts and a T-shirt. I said, "Jimmy, how have I dressed you on TV?" He said, "Well, Bill, the last territory," he said, "I wasn't too successful." I said, "As soon as I get some money, I'll buy a better wardrobe." I said, "Jimmy, if you don't have a better wardrobe by tomorrow night, you will be vaporized here because you're not going to be here. You're going to be gone. Because I'm not going to invest on TV to create this of you, and you kill it every night."
And the dress code, and it wasn't a suit and tie situation, but it was collared shirt. It was.
Well, it depended on what your gimmick was.
Yeah, and of course, like guys like Hacksaw Duggan were somewhat immune because he would look ridiculous.
No, it was a gimmick. No.
But I remember that the shorts and flip flops were a no. But it's brutally hot. Brutally hot in Louisiana and Houston, Texas in the summertime and humid. Dennis Condrey used to have, at the time, I don't know what you call them, but they were fashionable. It was a matching, like I can't say Dennis Condrey was wearing tennis shorts, but it was sports shorts and a nice shirt, and they were expensive outfits, but they fit the short business, right? And with the 300-mile trip in the car and the heat and going in. So what we do is in some of the places like Biloxi down on the coast where it's really sticky humid, he'd wear the shorts. And we knew Grizzly'd be watching. We were supposed to be in the locker room at 6:30, so we'd be there in the parking lot about 6:20, and I'd throw my suit bag over my shoulder, and Bobby'd have his 2 or 3 bags he carried with him. On the other side, we'd put Dennis in the middle. Dennis called it Pink Panther into the building. We'd sneak in past Grizzly. As soon as he got in the locker room, he'd drop his bag, whip his shorts off, put his undertights on. He never got fined. Now you'll probably find his address and find him in retro fine.
In other words, you were creating an image, and so you had whatever you were going to present. You had to live up to what you presented.
Right.
So we were presenting that our guys were tough. So if they were going to get out in places where that could get exposed, they better win. And another thing, remember, our territory never broke up a fight in the dressing room.
I remember that. Well, the guys not only had to be tough, they had to be tough to make the trips in the territory. They had to be tough to win the fights outside the arenas in the territory. But also, you were a firm believer in if guys had a problem in the locker room, instead of breaking it up, let's get it over with.
Well, yeah. Why let it fester? Because then all of a sudden you got the loudmouth guys always creating crap and never having to pay the price. So kind of like our society is today, where they can say whatever they want about you, slander you, or whatever, and then if you hit them, they sue you. Well, it generally couldn't happen in a dressing room. So, at times there's a lot of emotion, and that's okay to have emotion, but you may as well, as long as you're a man, you should be responsible for what comes out of your mouth. So if you want to overload your ass, you're going to have to get the collection paid for it. I'll never forget that Thunderbolt Patterson, and it was Baton Rouge, and Tank Patton, who I love Tank Patton. He did a 5-minute promo in the dressing room about how bad he was going to whip Thunderbolt's ass. And I think he left it all in the promo. Because in the fight, Thunderbolt just kicked the living crap out of him. And then Thunderbolt was mad at me for not stopping it. And I said, Bolt, if I'd have stopped it, then that would only have added fuel to the fire with the sides picking in the dressing room that guys would have thought you were a coward or that Bill was protecting you. But you whipped his ass. How fast do you think the next guy's going to be able to climb you? You whipped him good. And I said, Tank, maybe next time you want to fight somebody, you'll leave off the 5-minute promo. And then the other one was with John Nord and Hacksaw Butch Reed in Oklahoma City. You were there probably. And Butch Reed was a tough guy, a great athlete. John Nord was a big, strong kid from Minneapolis. And he all of a sudden thought that he could lead the match better than Butch Reed. And Butch was certainly the most experienced. And so John wouldn't do whatever Butch was trying to call in the ring, and then they got into it in the dressing room. And I'll tell you one thing about Butch Reed. He'd stand right up, and he's ready to roll. And he was ready to roll, and Nord stood up, and then he sat back down. I'll never forget, I was sitting there, and he said, well, I got the flu. He said, I'll fight you next week. And honoringness in me, I said, oh, Butch, him got the flu. Him's sick. Him will settle this next week. I thought, you shut your mouth off. And so then Nord just stepped up and hit Reed, and I mean, he popped him. And it was bone on bone, and they were toe-to-toe, and they were trading the heavy, heavy leather, except they were just bone-ass fists. And me and Doc are standing there listening and watching, and I said, Doc, how long would you stand up with one of those guys where you'd shoot in and take him down? Because Doc was a wrestler and I was a wrestler. And one thing's about being a wrestler, you're not going to spend much time on your feet when somebody can hit like either one of those guys could hit. And so pretty soon Nord starts giving ground. Butch is hammering him, he's breaking through, and he's popping him and popping him and popping him. And then Butch picks up a piece of 16-foot-long PVC tubing. And I grabbed the tubing. I said, no, it's going to be just hand to hand. I said, besides, what the hell are you going to hurt with a piece of 16-inch PVC? He said, oh, yeah, you're right. And he popped Nord a couple more times, and Nord had enough. Now, if you recall, Oklahoma City was early afternoon, and then we transported everybody to Tulsa that night for television.
I didn't actually see the fight, but I remember the aftermath with his face.
Well, yeah, and they were booked against each other in Tulsa, too. So I let them get there, and then I called them into a private room at the arena. And boy, I mean, the lips are swollen, the eyes are shut, and the big old marks. I mean, they've hammered each other. And I said, boys, that was really exciting. But I said, we didn't have the cameras there. We got the cameras here tonight. And I said, now, I don't pay any more. I don't bonus you for shooting. But I said, I'd really like you to do it again so I can tape it, because I said, I can then watch it later and really get off. I said, or if you were smart, but I said, neither one of you all are too smart. I said, if you were smart, I think you two should maybe figure out how to work it out instead of this other way. I said, oh, the lips and the eyes a little bit sore right now? I think we can work. I said, then Nord, you're a big dumbass rookie. And here's a veteran. And I said, if I were you, Nord, I think I'd let him engineer the match.
Yeah, lead it.
Unless you want to get your ass whipped. He said, I think you're right. And so then they had a lot better match.
One of the proudest moments of my life was the night that I could say, Butch, I'm glad I was able to save your life. In a joking way. As a matter of fact, it was in Tulsa. It was a tag match going on, Midnight Express against whoever it was, and Butch Reed was going to run in. And there's a four-way in the match, the referee's watching it, and Butch runs in, and right behind him is some fan from the third row, and as Butch slides in under the bottom rope, the guy grabs him, either around the waist or had hands of his tights or whatever. Now Butch is on his stomach, and he's under the rope, and there's the turnbuckle, so he's got no vantage point. And he's trying to reach back and swing, but the guy's on him, right, and doing whatever. I'm the only free soul in this whole match. I jump up on the apron and run down the apron and just start kicking the guy in the side of the head, trying to make him let go of Butch until cops could get there. And finally, I kicked him, and he kind of let go, and the cops grabbed him. Butch goes ahead and does his run, and the guy didn't hurt him. We get back to the locker room. I said, Butch, anytime you need me to help you out, baby, I'm there for you. He started dying laughing.
Yeah.
It was a dangerous. Tulsa was dangerous. Tulsa was dangerous because the people, they were there. That's the first time I ever retired from wrestling, was at ringside when we were wrestling you. I said, if I get back to the locker room alive, I'm never doing this again. I'm going home.
Yeah. The fans, they love the excitement, they love the business, and they respected it. Again, my contention was always, you can't make people believe anything. If a guy tells me he doesn't believe in wrestling, I can't force him. I could even whip him or wrestle him or hurt him, and all he's going to believe is that I'm tougher or can wrestle better than him, but it may not change his view of the wrestling. But I can demand that he respect me. And I think when you have that attitude that whatever you're going to do in the ring, you're going to do it so well that the fans respect you for what you're doing. I think that's the key thing, because one thing about fans, you can fool them for a little while, but you can't fool them for very long. Fans watch you and they're pretty critical and they enjoy it, but that's why the people that rise up, the cream comes to the top. The ones that come to the top, they have that innate something that separates them from everybody else.
And then the ones that stay there have the ability to adapt, but at the same time, they can transcend maybe any weaknesses in their game because of their personality, but they have to have something that really connects and really sticks for a long time. And something else, while we're on the subject of the fine system. You get fired if you lost a fight, but also everybody's talked about it, and a lot of guys hated the fine system. he worked this territory, drive 4,000 miles a week, and I'm 20 minutes late, he's going to find me, or whatever. But the point was, to me, I made $100,000 that year to go to college. And I didn't get fined very much because I was too scared to do anything wrong. But when you find somebody because they don't get there on time, you've got to set up the show. And this wasn't a situation where now guys get to Monday Night Raw, they get there at noon, it goes on at 8 o'clock Eastern time or whatever, 9 o'clock. We were asked to be there an hour before the show started. 7:30 bell, excuse you.
Thank you.
7:30 bell, be there at 6:30. Dress somewhat professionally, and don't do stupid shit in the ring. And I remember one night in Houston was a 6-man tag, Ernie Ladd and the Midnight Express with me against Hacksaw Duggan and the Rock and Roll Express. Carl Fergie was the referee. And that match was taped for television. And you sent out a memo afterwards, along with the fines for everybody, explaining that it was taped for television in Houston, but it couldn't be aired because of Ernie Ladd used his tape thumb, used an unauthorized gimmick just to get heat. Didn't even use it for the finish, but just to get heat. So he fined Ernie for unauthorized use of a gimmick. Duggan and I believe it was Bobby Eaton started doing a fencing thing with chairs where they were swinging chairs at each other, clack, clack. So you find them each $50 for using chairs for no reason because they didn't even hit anybody. Plus, also, they middled the referee who was having to stand there and watch them. Then you find Carl Fergie $50 for allowing himself to be middled because he didn't disqualify him for doing this stupid shit. You find Dennis Condrey $50 for doing the back rape without leaving any bloody furrows. And you find Dr. Death, who ran in to save the baby faces when we were getting heat on him afterwards for running in shorts and flip-flops. It was carnage. It was the great fine St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But I learned from one memo, and they learned financially, but I learned by reading, thank God, you shouldn't do this shit.
Well,
and once you know it, don't do it again.
yeah, and I understand that you've got a better memory of the individual fines than I do.
Well, that was a classic.
And the other thing I understand is you've been on both sides. You've now owned your own promotion.
Yeah.
And one thing as a promoter, you have to know who's going to be there. And let's say a guy that's a key guy in your event, and like you say, our events had packages where you might be running in the third match, in the 8th match, or 7th match, or something like that. And let's say you've been in a car wreck, or been stopped by the police and arrested, or something like that, and weren't going to make the event. So if you're not in the building an hour ahead of the match, we couldn't very well count on laying out the match that we'd invested out everything for then. So my expectation was that you had to be there an hour before the match. And this was before
cell phones,
yeah.
So you really had no way of finding any of the guys.
And so that was a standard fine. And the other thing was you had to stay until the end of the match or until the representative of the office, if you asked him, he said it was okay to leave. Because otherwise, first of all, if you really believed our sport was real, and as a wrestler, if you really wanted to get ahead in the business, you watched the other matches. I watched the other matches all the time in my career because I wanted to be better than they were. I also wanted to be sure that what somebody did in their match, I didn't go out and repeat. So, all of a sudden, if it's so manipulated that you get there late and do your match and leave, you have no interest in the content of the event, so you don't care anything. And you're right. And it was also hated this scratching thing because it was so sissified. So if you were going to scratch somebody, you better leave first. Same thing I said about biting. If you bite somebody, you better leave bite marks. And the thing about gimmicks, if we hadn't programmed a gimmick into the match and you used a gimmick, maybe we were going to use it for a more important reason than it was. So you're right, we had a fine system. But what a fine system really was about personal discipline and personal responsibility. And if you knew our rules and regulations and you wanted to work for us, you were going to do them. Now the other thing is you left out that I bonus guys all the time.
Yeah. And the fines are better stories. The fines are better stories, but we got bonuses.
You're a damn crybaby. The bottom line is that the bonus is too for guys that went above and beyond the call. Now, I want to draw the fine thing into this. Remember, right now the National Basketball Association has just put a dress code in. And money is so big in that sport now. Here's a sport that in my era, the ratings were so bad with NBA basketball, it was like chicken tracks. They couldn't even get a rating on TV. And now it's one of the hot sports. And they are great athletes. These guys are phenomenal athletes. I love to watch them play. But the NBA says we have an image, and we're commercializing this image. Therefore, you're going to wear a dress code. You're going to have a dress code. And they're saying, I make $20 million a year, I make $50, I can wear anything I want, I can do whatever I want. Well, let me tell you, no, you can't. If you're going to make the $20 million because you're part of the NBA, the NBA then should have the right to have standards and policies that they feel keep the position and the image of the business in its proper form. And all I was, you see, I've heard every excuse. I used to let you guys tell me their excuses just to see how far you'd lie to me. Remember, one of my favorite statements was, guys, I was born at night, it just wasn't last night. Because I've done all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then when all of a sudden the role changed when it's my money invested, and I'm here to stay and you guys are passing through. But I'm not going to let you hurt my business. So when a guy is late to an event and he says, the hotel forgot to wake me up on time. Well, fine, I can't find the hotel, but I can find you. Buy a better alarm clock. I don't want to hear yours. I've heard that excuse about the hotel not waking you up. What a weak stick excuse. Or the guy says, the airplane was late. Well, you should have taken an early flight.
Should have had a backup.
The guy says, my car broke down. Buy a new one. You know, in other words, what we have to say is your excuses don't really mean anything.
Yeah, I've said on both sides of the fence, like you said, and the thing is, the guys, a lot of times the guys will, the boys, the talent, the wrestlers, will be the ones to screw things up for the boys more often than not. And of course, so the fine stories are legendary. But when we first got there, and you had promised the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette they were going to have a certain spot and going to make an approximate amount of money in that spot. And the first few weeks we got there, it was Christmas time and first part of January. Business wasn't that great. And we were just underneath, just getting some wins to start out, because I found my old paycheck receipts from when I've unpacked everything I've saved, and I would see $100 for Little Rock plus 75, $150 for Baton Rouge plus 50, whatever. You plussed enough to make it approximately the amount of money that you thought we wouldn't be insulted by, even though our position on the card nor the house necessarily,
both of those things
didn't particularly call for us making more money. But you knew you had plans. You didn't want us to be discouraged or think we'd been misrepresented to. So we got some bonuses. And there were more bonuses on the ones that I remember looking at than there were fines.
Well, and another thing.
But I've been on both sides now, so I can kind of identify with some of it.
People are created equals in the Constitution of the United States. But in reality, people are different levels of talent and different levels of value. So let's say I had an Ernie Ladd against a nobody. And because of Ernie Ladd's status, it drew money. I'm going to pay Ernie Ladd more than this guy. But the way to do it fair was, if each of them were due by the match, say 500, was give that guy 500, Ernie 500, and then bonus Ernie 500 because he was the one that really was important in the match. So I used that system too, but that system was used a lot by Vince McMahon Sr. There was a contract system that back when I worked for Vince Sr. that I got a third more than my opponent, because I had to kick back to him. But the bottom line, it still made me more money than the guy that I wrestled against, because I was one of the New York guys. So, you see today in the NFL, if you do something that's against their rules blatantly, they fine you. There has to be consequences for your actions. Good, then reward. Bad, then you've got to pay. That's just running it as a business. And the amazing thing was, guys that got so upset with me, like Paul Orndorff, would call me back years later and said, I want to just tell you, I cannot tell you how much I learned working with you, and now I understand the things you were trying to teach me.
Oh yeah, you poisoned all of us. Because now it's like, well, this doesn't make sense. What? You want it to make sense? But that's a part. All of those things went into creating the territory that you had. The respect from the fans, the credibility with the fans, the emotion, the passion in the buildings, the money in markets that were either in some cases depressed or definitely not major metropolitan markets were drawn tremendous houses.
Well, let's take it one state, Louisiana. The total gross revenue in wrestling before I started booking there, was $400,000 for one. That's the biggest year they'd ever had. We were doing $4 million a year in the one state. Now that's not big by Vince's numbers, but you got to realize there was no pay-per-views, and these were small population areas.
We did $46,000 in Alexandria, Louisiana, at the Rapides Parish Coliseum for the last Stampede match. When that arena in Alexandria, Louisiana, which was a wonderful experience to live in, ran 26 times a year.
That's right, and we had a 60 share rating on that television. Let me tell you the funniest fine story. Let me tell you a funny one. Sometimes I had fun with it. There was a big black guy named Bad Leroy Brown.
Bad Leroy Brown.
And he was a little bit racial, and I loved the guy. See, I didn't care what... You weren't dancing with me, and we didn't swap spit, we weren't engaged or anything else. You were working for me, and I was working with you, so you didn't have to like me as long as you bought into what we were trying to do as a concept and gave me 100% in the ring. So Bad Leroy is working in Jackson, Mississippi. He and Ernie Ladd were teamed. Now they were the worst team as workers I ever saw, and drew tons of money. They're just a team that drew, here's 6'9", 320, and then Bad Leroy is 6'6" and 3+.
Easily.
So they drew a lot of money with Junkyard Dog and I, because it was a joke. I used to think you guys
horrible matches,
but great box office. So anyway, Bad Leroy is working in Jackson, Mississippi on a Wednesday, hits the top ring rope, which my rings, that was part of the structure. They were steel cables inside the rubber, and the cable snapped. And he went over the top, which was the second rope then, landed on his head on the concrete, split his head wide open, had a brain concussion, and I think he cracked or injured his ankle. So the next Tuesday night is Junkyard Dog and I against him and Ernie in Rapides Parish in Alexandria. And I haven't seen Bad Leroy, and he's on crutches. He's got 20...
And the locker rooms there were separate.
Yeah, separate locker rooms. He's got 20-some stitches in his head. His head's swollen like everything. He's not in the best mood, and I fined him for breaking the top ring rope. And they gave him his check. I could hear him scream from that locker room over there, "That fat, white, honky son of a bitch, I'll kill him." And then I had Grizzly, and by then I was sending over the finishes.
Now you got sticky
on the recorder. So I sent the message over, and Grizz hands it to him, and the deal was, "Leroy, when you come out, because you're advertised, we realize you're on crutches, but you're still going to come to the ring with Ernie. We'll have the substitute for the match for you, but I want you to have a gaff ready, because I'm going to take your crutch away from you and hit you right in the head where you got all the stitches, and I need you to gaff yourself when you go down." I mean to tell you, you could hear him cussing again. Now, this was a rib, because Grizz and Ernie and all of us had worked out a completely different thing that left him totally out of the picture.
It was never going to happen.
Except coming to the ring. But I want to tell you, he screamed and he hollered and he fumed. I'll quit that. I'll never work for him again. When the bell rang and we're in the ring, we look up and here comes Bad Leroy on the crutches. And I looked down at his finger and he had the gaff ready. Now, you see, that's the kind of guy you love. As mad as he was, the tradition of the business, he was still going to go to that ring, and he was going to do what he thought was right to do, which was what the office wanted him to do. Now, I didn't take his crutch away from him. I didn't have him. Grizz intercepted him and got him out there, and I bonused him. And we let him know then the whole thing was a rib, because I really loved the guy. He was a neat guy, but that was one of the funny things about it.
And that's what overall, even though the guys would kick and squawk and scream, it was a chance not only for younger guys, and I'm talking the Ted DiBiase's and Hacksaw Duggans and Dr. Deaths and Freebirds and Midnight Expresses, Rock and Roll Express, Terry Taylor, on down the line, a chance for them to work a major territory, to make good money, and at the same time learn and take that knowledge later on. But you ran a very difficult territory to work. But by the same token,
the logistics were so tough.
The area and then the highway system at that time. But if you could make it there, as the old saying goes, you could make it anywhere. And so many guys did.
And that's what Orndorff. He called me back and said, all the big money in New York. He said, I just, and we have a great personal respect for each other, Paul and I. Matter of fact, when I went to WCW, I hired him to help us. Because he...
Remember, he was working for me. He called me and said, "How's Paul look?" I said, "He looks great."
Because by then he was a teacher. See, he was a teacher. So let me tell you one thing about Orndorff. As mad as he would get at me, and he would get so mad every Wednesday when we handed out the checks at interviews, I changed the deal, quit handing the checks out until after interviews. But he never gave less than 100% in the ring. I'll tell you another great story. We had him and Ted DiBiase in Jackson, Mississippi. They were both baby faces, and we were getting ready to turn one of them heel. You probably remember which, but I don't remember which one. But we had them both as baby faces in a match against each other, and I told him to go an hour Broadway.
You know what? I have a tape of that, what was shown on television of that match at home, and I'm trying to remember.
Well, it didn't make any difference. But the deal was, at this stage of their growth, they didn't feel they could do an hour of Broadway as babyfaces. And they were just so downtrodden. They finally called me aside and said, "Boss, you're killing us off. There's no way we can do an hour of Broadway as babyfaces in this town. This town loves action. And this will kill us. And it's just, you got to do something." And I knew, I'd watched their moods change, and I knew, so I said, "All right, guys," I said, "I believe a lot more in you guys. I think you guys are a lot greater than you realize. I think you're ready for this next step. But if you guys are such pussies, you can't do it. I want you to still go to within 5 minutes of the end of the hour, then here's your finish. That's, of course, if you can't make the hour because you're such pussies. But I think a lot more of you two than that. I really believe you can do it." What a deal. They tore the place down and went the hour Broadway as baby faces, and it changed both of them because they both came out of that ring knowing more about themselves.
We talked about so many of these names, and especially Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer after the hurricane hit New Orleans.
One of my favorites, Dave Meltzer.
But he did a great story on the wrestling history in New Orleans at the Superdome because of the newsworthiness. And JYD was synonymous with wrestling in New Orleans, and he's the one that popped the big house at the Superdome that one time with the blinding angle with the Freebirds. Point being, here you had guys in their early 20s. Terry Gordy might not even have been 20 at that time.
Drawing 19 years old.
Drawing 30,000 people to a wrestling event at the time where there was no internet and not a lot of communication, so people in other parts of the country in the business, well, that couldn't happen. You had young guys drawing big houses and getting the first big breaks of their careers, and we've talked about all those names that made it. Who are some of the guys, or if there are any, that you thought were can't-miss superstars that for one reason or another it didn't happen? Well, who didn't go on the way you thought they would? I don't mean for you to bury anybody.
And first of all, let's make one thing really crystal clear. I'm not infallible. I'm a human being. I'm very fallible. The first one I'll call to mind is somebody I think wouldn't make it that drew big money. Ray Candy. I had tried everything with Ray Candy, and he just didn't draw. And then Ernie came in and was getting over like gangbusters. And he came to me after about 3 or 4 weeks on television smashing people and said, "I want to work a deal with Ray Candy. I want to put him over right in the middle on Shreveport Television," which was our television that went everywhere. I said, "You're crazy. You and I are going to draw a fortune. I'm not going to let you kill yourself off." Ray Candy, he said, "I'm telling you, I can sell out everywhere." I said, "You couldn't draw money with Ray Candy anywhere. He's a great guy. I love the guy, but he won't draw any money." Ernie said, "Trust me. I know my gimmick. I know me. I know this thing." He said, "We'll set him up." I said, "Well, you can't put him over on TV." "No, we'll let him have a DQ." "No, he's going to beat me right in the middle." I said, "No." He said, "Bill, trust me." I took a leap of faith. Ernie Ladd put Ray Candy over right in the middle on television, and it sold out everywhere. Now then,
Ray Candy was figured into some of your early Superdome shows.
Yeah. I mean, that show with Dog and them, we had built momentum every show. Our Superdomes. By then, we were running the first Superdome was one I was scared because it cost more money to open the doors than we'd ever even drawn in New Orleans. And I was scared to death, and Leroy was scared to death. Ernie was on that card, and Ray Candy too. And I think we drew $87,000 our very first one with Seymour Smith was our partner, and he was the new owner of Channel 26 in New Orleans, a great guy from New York. His son David Smith and a kid that worked for him named Skip, and they all really worked their ass off in helping promote it. And we went in there, and $87,000 was a tremendous success. And I'll never forget, we're sitting in the office the next week, and Grizz is sitting there, and Ernie had come in but didn't say anything, and was standing there, and Leroy had turned to me, and Leroy was in a bad mood and had that cigar going, and he said, Grizz, he said, what do you think of that Superdome? And Grizz said, what do you mean, boss? And I said, gee, Leroy, what do you mean? That was the biggest house this territory's ever had. He said, I thought there was too many of that N-word on the card and too many of that N-word in the audience. What do you think, Grizz? And rolling that cigar. And Grizz said, boss, I thought the money was green. The absolute right answer. It's supposed to be about the money you draw. And Ernie caught a glimpse of what I was having to deal with.
Put in perspective, this was 1978, right?
Whatever the year
I believe it
I'm
was.
terrible on dates.
But put in perspective, $87,000 was more money than a sellout at Madison Square Garden at that point in time.
Well, and bottom line, we'd never, so it was a huge thing in the So anyway, Ernie took Ray Candy, and it just was phenomenal. Then Ernie took another guy that I really liked, Randy Tyler. He'd give his heart for you in the match, but I couldn't get Randy over. And he wanted to do something with Randy. I said, it'll never work. Oh, yeah, and he tried there, and it didn't work.
Right.
So, a lot of times it was that snapshot or that moment of that time, or where that person was, or where our territory was, or where I was. Dewey Robertson, I thought was the classiest guy, looked good, dressed well, spoke so well. I could never get him over as a babyface. Never get him over. I put the title on him, did everything. Could not get him over. But as the missing link, as there was he released something in him. That gimmick brought something out in him, and he became a star. So, there was a lot of guys that I missed it on. There was a lot of guys we made more stars, I think, than most people. We took guys and formed them into stars. We worked them so hard, but we put them in positions that got them out of that comfort zone, that really pushed them, that made them have to excel. Buddy Landell could have been anything. He was his own worst enemy, but he'd give you 100% in that ring every time.
Buddy at one point had racked up so many fines for various indiscretions that you couldn't take him out of his check because the fines were bigger than his check. So he was paying installments. There was like 6-week installments on his fines out of his check.
But he would give you his all in the ring. He was just so self-destructive. I still have a soft spot in my heart for Buddy. Eddie Gilbert, self-destructive. So much talent, though. I think what we did is we gave guys an opportunity to present themselves. We gave them an opportunity to participate. I don't think a guy ever went on one of our television shows that didn't know what his role was on that show.
Right.
I think that amazed guys that came and watched our shows, how we'd lay out our shows.
Well, as a matter of fact, one of the ways that I learned not only to prepare for booking, but also just to do effective local promos, which was a big part of the business back then. I was used to Memphis television was live, and then we'd get to the Coliseum 2 hours early on Monday night, and they'd say, okay, you're in Louisville against so-and-so, we do a local promo. Well, your tape was on a bicycle. So what we shot 2 shows in Shreveport on Wednesday night, and they would air the following Saturday in New Orleans and Shreveport, but they would air the following Saturday after that, maybe in Baton Rouge and Alexandria, and the following Saturday after that in Houston and Little Rock.
There was a 3-week bicycle.
There was a 5-week bicycle, Bill, by the time I got there.
No, we had more than
promise you, by the time that last show that we shot in Shreveport aired everywhere, it was 5 weeks. It was 2 shows a night. But point being, at interviews, you would have our formats for the shows that had been done that we were going to do promos for. You would have a list of the opponents. In the show number, you would look and you could talk about anything that had happened up into show number 142, segment 4, because there was even a list that showed you where the local promos were going in the breaks. And all the guys are tearing their hair out and just saying, somebody tell me what to talk about. But if you looked at it and got the key, that's where I learned to organize these things. Because that way you can't go wrong.
No, it's a business. If you're going to be on top and be a representative and make the top money, then you've got to grow. And we can't stay a little bitty boy and have mama have to do everything for you.
Well, I made a lot of money off that for a while.
Yeah.
But we did interviews from 9 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock, whatever it was, to about 4 o'clock in the afternoon for all those markets. Then, of course, we'd leave and drive 200 miles to the town that night and work. But it was a very well thought out process because that way you had so many TV markets, you couldn't have the same matches fresh off Saturday's television in all your markets.
No, you had to follow
so you bicycled the tape, and that way
you had to follow what was on what they were seeing. You couldn't be talking about something they hadn't seen.
So the people in New Orleans saw something 3 weeks before the people in Little Rock, Arkansas did, but we made it work because it was fresh to them. And there was no internet, which has killed American society today in a lot of respects. People can't do anything for themselves except gossip now, as I get off the soapbox. Before we close up, real quickly, one of I think the things that wrestling is missing today, like we said, is that area of order, and you tried to bring that order. We talked way earlier in this interview about WCW. One of the things that you try to do there also was misconstrued in that you banned the top rope. You did a lot of things, but I know it's so funny because I saw what you were trying to do.
Sure, anybody with a brain would.
The fans nearly rioted over how this is sacrilegious and heresy or whatever to ban all these people.
Let's stop right there. Wait a minute. Stop right there. Did it get a reaction?
Oh, yeah.
All right. A reaction's what you're after, right?
But also,
if the reaction by the fans is this or this, it's still a reaction. We got a reaction.
Right.
Then it's up to us to take off that reaction and build what we want to build.
But what you came into a company where there were 30 guys.
Where there was no standard.
There was no discipline and no standard. But also, if there were 30 guys in the company, 28 of them were doing the same things.
Well, let me tell you how.
And you wanted to take everything back so that then when you had a guy that could do something right, that became his, and this guy that became his, and that way it could be featured. But you never had the chance to finish that.
Let me tell you how ridiculous it was. They had spent, which was then a lot of money, to have an independent company come in and do a survey by wrestling fans about what wrestling fans wanted to see. They spent $30,000 at TBS for a survey. Now that's huge money.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have spent $30,000 for them to do. It's just ridiculous. And what the survey said, I read the survey. It had been done in some other body's era before I got there and been ignored. I read the survey, and what the survey was, everybody wanted something different than what Vince McMahon was doing. They wanted the old NWA. They wanted the rough, the tough, the yada, yada, yada. And I said, first of all, Vince McMahon has created a new genre, and he's the master of his own creation because it's his dream. So anything we try to do like him is we're copycatting the original. Let's go do what we do best, what we grew up with. Let's go back and take wrestling to what it was and what the fans are saying they want.
The fans that are already predisposed to watch that product because that 5 years before is what it had been.
Anyway, we did what... Now, the top rope thing. See, I didn't take away the top rope. I made the top rope illegal. So they thought, oh my gosh, all the high-flying moves off the top rope you've eliminated. No, I haven't. I've made them have more focus. Because now a guy has to sneak it. The referee has to be knocked down. There has to be a distraction. There has to be... So whatever move he does off the top is more spectacular because it's probably going to be a finish. The next thing I did is I removed the mats around the ring. Oh my God, well, we're tough. We don't need mats around the ring. Let me tell you, mats around the ring to me are dangerous. If you hit in the seam, you're going to turn your ankle. Last night as I got out of the ring, somebody had pulled up to try to help this old man get out of the Ring of Honor ring and stuck a damn chair there.
A plastic chair?
I like to broke my leg on the plastic chair. I didn't need a chair. I'd gotten in the damn ring. I can get out today. If he can get in the ring, and when I'm 80, I'll be able to get in the ring. So the bottom line is we took, oh my gosh, you're hurting the wrestlers. Well, I've been in the ring all my life. I'd rather have something I'm coming down on that doesn't move.
I've seen people blow their knees. I blew my knee one night in Philadelphia, jumping off the apron to get away from some flying chair and landing on the edge of the mats. And the thing is, you can take a little pissy-ass bump on concrete, and the people will go, ooh, because it's the floor.
That's right.
You can get backdropped over the top rope and land on this 2-inch thick mat and still kill yourself, and people go, oh, it's padded.
That's right. So the
perception.
It's perception. But what you've got to build mystery. See, first of all, to me, it's not heat if you go right out in front of the referee and screw the babyface. It just makes the referee look stupid. Remember the fine of Fergie?
Middling the referee.
Why middle the referee? Why beat up Jim Ross? What is it? That just makes it all fake and a charade. And remember, I still believed the people wanted to see rough, tough wrestling. They still do. They wouldn't come to the Ring of Honor.
I heard people in the WWF offices say, we go ahead and admit it that it's predetermined because we don't want to insult the people's intelligence. Wait. You're insulting their intelligence if you tell them that you're lying to them on the television program that you present, Raw or whatever, and then you go on the Tonight Show and say, oh, what we do over there is all phony. We've come up with it all. But over here, you're lying to them. There, you're telling them the truth. That, to me, is insulting intelligence.
Again,
keep your story straight.
You know, Vince, without a doubt, has taken wrestling to a different level. But if you're saying he's the best promoter because he also got in when they were changing the venue where you had pay-per-view. Even back when I was at WCW, there was 20 million homes wired for one event. So it gave him a great advantage. But so if you're saying he's the best promoter because he has done the biggest amount of gross dollars, that'd be like saying McDonald's are the best hamburgers. Is McDonald's a better hamburger than your mom made? I don't think so. But they've sold the most, so you'd have to say they're the best hamburger company. I think Vince is great in what he's done, but I think what he's done has destroyed the business. I think what he created was a macabre cartoon that came to life. But he's had the wherewithal. He's re-educated the public to what that you could never take it backwards. Again, that's why I'm saying, why is the Octagon with the UFC the toughest new event that's in sports? With pay-per-view, they've increased their pay-per-view price because the battles on there are brutal and they're bloody. And I mean, they figure somebody's getting their ass whipped. Yeah. They don't think it's a work. They don't think it's choreographed. There's somebody out there getting clocked.
And so when you were attempting to do this in WCW and didn't get it, you started a book that you didn't get a chance to finish writing because before these things could unfold, things happened. But you were trying to trying to present an alternative product. I'm so frazzled I can't even form a cogent simile. You were trying to present an alternative product to what's out there because if there's only 2 restaurants in the country and they both sell chicken, then somebody's going to suffer. So why don't you turn around and sell some beef? But the culmination of your labors was not able to be realized because you were gone before these things took effect.
The crowning point of it is, though, in a way, I got to step back since I took myself out of that. And I took myself out at the right time for the right reason. And my life is a different life now. I still love what we went through, and I have great memories, and I love the business, but I'm not a part of it. But I love the fact that Vince McMahon kicked Ted Turner's ass. Because Ted Turner had 30 companies, had all that money. He should have been able to snuff Vince out like he was a flea on an elephant's ass. But he couldn't even beat Vince because he didn't run his wrestling business the right way. Ted Turner was the only one that knew the value there. The wrestling ratings for the history of WTBS had a higher station average rating than any program they ever had. And yet they butchered it and butchered it and butchered it. And
it almost seemed like they couldn't kill him. They couldn't do it on purpose and have hired any more incompetent, disinterested people.
And Bischoff, when he gets here's a guy that was, to my opinion, was a sorry, lousy booth announcer. We wouldn't even let him announce anything that was
on the seashell.
But he invented a couple of games for Hollywood or something, so the guys at Turner thought, oh, he's got to be a genius then.
Well, he wrote a resume where he served his third course at the Last Supper.
What they lose Didn't they lose something like $80 million?
About $80 million. So was it 60 or 80?
But here's what happened. When Ted Turner sold control, and the bean counters looked at his operation, they looked at wrestling and said, that's it. We're not throwing any money down that hole. And so really and truly, the great thing, and my hat's off to Vince McMahon for one thing, for kicking Ted Turner, the mouth of the South's ass, kicking his ass good in wrestling.
Well, you know, WCW was Jim Crockett Promotions, renamed. They bought it from Crockett, who was about $2 million in the hole, as I recall, from buying a couple of territories and a couple of airplanes and whatever.
He bought my territory and hired me as a consultant, and then would never talk to me.
Yeah, well, I know that feeling too. That was my title here until recently. A consultant that was very rarely consulted.
Crockett's another one that this exposed him for his real genius.
But Jim Crockett Promotions grossed something like, because I have lawsuit depositions to back this figure up, grossed something like $20 million in the middle 80s, whether 87 or 88 or whatever, and they took that company. And Turner Broadcasting bought it. It was still drawing. The wrestling was drawing.
Yeah.
Richmond, Virginia did a $140,000 gate for its monthly show the month before TBS took over ownership, and they took it and hired people who had no reason otherwise than nepotism or insanity to be involved in that company, and slowly but surely lost millions.
A 6-passenger jet. That's good in the wrestling business.
We are almost out of time. We're not out of stories, and we're going to have to do this again because we haven't even got to all the other people we could knock.
The rule in the wrestling business is simple. If you're not here to protect yourself, you're fair game.
Bill, thank you very much. Cowboy Bill Watts, thank you, and thank you for joining us.